Chapter 2284. The bloody incident at Blood Dripping Peak immediately spread throughout the interior heaven, and then spread to the exterior heaven. Ever since Lu Xiaoyi came to the interior heaven, he had always appeared to be as gentle as water, looking like a nice guy. It had never even been said that he had fought or gotten angry with anyone, causing many people's legends about him to be in a vague state. But this time, everyone was clear. This was a wolf cub that had disguised himself as a sheep. When he opened his mouth to bite someone, that was when blood would really be spilled. No one stood out to uphold justice for this. It was not worth it. The whole incident was clear and logical, and the grudges were clear. You failed to surround someone, and in the end, you were returned alive and killed. This was the most classic scene in the cultivation world, and there was no one to blame. Furthermore, no one was an idiot about the inside story behind this incident, and they all had reliable guesses. Those who were involved hid themselves deeply, and even left temporarily. Those who were not involved were high and mighty. In this era where the great Tao was established, who would wade into these muddy waters for the sake of a little friendship and so-called justice? Wouldn't that be seeking trouble for themselves? They might not even be able to get away with it. In the past, in the interior heaven, when there were similar cases of murder, there would always be second severance old cultivators of the interior heaven who would step forward, either to mediate, warn, or punish. But as the saying went, killing one person was killing 10,000 people was a hero. When you killed a dozen of these old second severance old cultivators of the interior heaven in one go, no one would step forward. The whole interior heaven sank into a strange silence. They turned a blind eye, heard a deaf ear, and pretended not to know. Because the murderer was brutal. Because order had collapsed. Because everyone had to clean their own snow. There was a more important matter in front of everyone, and that was to go to the land of the Yellow Dragon to establish Tao. In front of a great Tao immortal, who would be willing to take care of such a thankless task. They couldn't even hide. In the end, the interior heaven was a place without sex, and there was no reason for them to step forward even if they had to save face. Thus, the death of 7 second severance half-immortals, such a big murder case, actually did not stir up much news. When it spread, they knew, and then, there was no more and then. Just like in some celestial mountain, a few insignificant little beasts had died in a fight for territory. The value of human life was really chilling in this chaotic era. In such a leisurely atmosphere, Lu Xiaoyi welcomed Heaven's Eye's inquiry. A magnificent treasure light descended. Within the treasure light, there were 4 illusory figures with different auras. Clearly, they were the projections of the 4 immortal monarchs of the Heavenly Eye. This was the first time he had seen such a grand scene. Previously, it was just a figment of his imagination. Now, it was actually Hongguang? In fact, he was very curious. The immortals of the immortal court were dying one after another. Why were the 4 immortal monarchs still alive? In terms of probability, this was not scientific. Could there be other reasons? Was it because of the Heavenly Eyes and his contributions to the world of cultivators that he had survived the accident longer than other deities? One of the phantoms said, Xianyuan Lu Xiaoyi. As a member of the Eye of Heaven, you have the position of enforcer, yet you knowingly broke the law and killed your colleagues without reporting it. Do you know your crime? Lu Xiaoyi denied it directly. I killed him, but it's not appropriate for me to admit my guilt. Actually, I know nothing about the position of enforcer. But if the meaning of this position is to be killed without being able to fight back, then I don't care about this position. Also, I'm requesting to withdraw from the Eye of Heaven because someone is plotting against me. You immortal monarchs failed to see through the truth and instead helped the evildoer. If I stay here for too long, I'm afraid I won't live for long. Lu Xiaoyi turned the tables and started scolding the immortal court. This was something he had planned long ago. The Eye of Heaven's interrogation was unavoidable, but his situation was not bad. The heavenly immortal monarch had been able to survive until now because of the so-called fairness of the eye of heaven. Perhaps there would be some little tricks behind the scenes, but they would not dare to show favoritism on the surface. Speaking of which, he still had to thank Lord Numinous Treasure and Ancient Beast God for their help. The two of them had successfully escalated the internal strife of killing 7 members of the Sky Eyes to a relatively high level, which led to the joint trial of the 4 halls. With so many people in the interrogation, some tricks could no longer be used. Therefore, even though Lord Numinous Treasure and Ancient Beast God were sitting there without saying a word, their presence was actually a form of help in disguise. It was still that illusory figure. Are you suspecting that we are bending the law for favoritism? Lu Xiaoyi's neck stiffened. It's not a suspicion. It's a confirmation. The host deliberately arranged and set up an inescapable net. Sealed space, alien territory, impure earth from afar, inner and outer scenic skies gathered, eastern and western skies imparted Tao, yellow dragon powder messenger, and 3 day-night watchers. There was also a Great Ping who came from afar. In the end, the Great Ping personally came. I just want to ask, whose handiwork is this? In the hall, the mirror of eminence hangs high. Under the heavenly Tao, it can see through everything. Who dares to tell me that these are all coincidences? That they are all accidents? If these are all accidents, then the golden origin in the inner scenic skies was also an accident for me. I was practicing a move and made a mistake. Lu Xiaoyi's ruffian temper flared up, and he ignored everything. I can accept the punishment. The lords in the heavens can also not pursue this matter. Those in power are not guilty. But there are many people involved in this matter. Who is behind this? Who is spreading the news? Who is using the wing-spread wings to raise insects and destroy the foundation of the human cultivation world? Who is helping the tyrant to do evil and nurture a tiger? If you can't find out, or don't dare to, or are in cahoots and only vent your anger on me, then don't blame me for rebelling against the heavenly eyes and not obeying them. Heaven has its heavenly Tao and people have their rules. Only others are allowed to do bad things, but not me. I think there is no need for the heavenly eyes to exist. Let's just disband and rely on our own abilities. Life and death are up to the heavens. There was silence in the virtual shadow. Some were calm and unruffled in the midst of chaos, some were gloating, and some were angry out of humiliation. Some were sitting on pins and needles, and so on. Originally, it was a good opportunity to denounce, but now this ruffian directly took away the fig leaf and questioned the value of the heavenly eye's existence. This was borrowing power. There were 2 kinds of borrowing power, forward borrowing and reverse borrowing. Forward borrowing meant following the general trend and taking advantage of the chaos to fish in troubled waters. But the Heavenly Eyes organization chose to borrow reverse. In a chaotic world, they maintained order, protected living creatures, followed the most ancient distinction between good and evil, and became a clear stream in the torrential flood, thus gaining the special favor of the heavenly Tao. They had indeed gained it. Since the collapse of the great Tao until now, the 4 immortals had not met with any mishap even though less than half of the immortals had died. This was clear proof. Then, Lu Xiaoyi's attack was the Achilles heel of the heavenly eyes now. There might be some people who would hate this, but on the surface this layer of fig leaf could not be removed. Some things had been hanging for such a long time. They could not be abandoned just because of one person or one thing. Amidst the awkward silence, another human silhouette spoke up. That's right. The heavenly eyes will send someone else to investigate the reason. But you killed a member of the heavenly eyes without reporting it. Although there is a reason, it can't be encouraged. Now, you are stripped of your position as the enforcer and demoted to an inspector. We will make a conclusion after everything is investigated clearly. Are you convinced? Lu Xiaoyi was a little confused. There is a position under the enforcer. Chapter 2285. Lu Xiaoyi was demoted to an inspector. This change in personnel within Heaven's Eye was even more heated than his murder. It instantly spread throughout both interior and exterior. Heaven's Eye had long become Bright Eyes. This was also a special response under special circumstances. It was to raise this flag, gather strength, and maintain order. Therefore, the news was all public. He killed 7 people and was demoted by 1 rank. What was going on? Some busybodies dug into Heaven's Eye's professional system. They didn't know until they dug, but they were shocked. There were actually many ranks under the Inspector of Punishments. Bo Zheng, Xia Guan, Bing Chao, Yu Fu, Pei Rong, Yu Rin, and so on. How many more people would die when this evil person was completely wiped out? This was a person with a license to kill, so this was probably the only way to understand it. Some were dissatisfied, some were resentful, and some were indifferent. If they didn't get involved in such a quarrel, they wouldn't be bothered at all. In fact, there was only one characteristic of this ferocious person in the interior realm. I won't attack unless I'm attacked. It didn't seem excessive? Inspector Lu planned to hold a big banquet in interior, and the topic was his 3,000th birthday. In fact, he wasn't too sure whether it was 3,000 years, but it was probably about the same. The key was that at this time, it was necessary to express goodwill after being cruel once and to harmonize the mood of interior. It was hypocritical, but it had to be done. It was a kind of attitude. It could greatly improve everyone's view of him and let people understand that although his methods were cruel, he was a reasonable person and didn't kill for the sake of killing. Cultivators' birthdays were actually a disguised gathering. Mortals valued birthdays because they didn't have many years to live. Cultivators were different. Because of their long life rings, their birthdays were usually counted in round numbers. For example, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years. Most of the time, it was a private gathering of 3 or 5 good friends, wasting time, sighing about life, commenting on the past, and looking forward to the future. It was rare to hold a big banquet like in the mortal world, where no one was rejected. If it was too vulgar, it would lack the artistic conception of cultivation. But Inspector Lu was different. Of course, no matter what this person did, the interior celestial beings were already used to his mischief and were not surprised. However, since he had just killed someone, it was understandable for him to spread his remonstrance. They all understood what he meant. You're here because you don't blame me for killing. Then, they would have a foundation to get along with each other. If you don't come, does that mean you have something to say? It was a kind of hidden stance. You could understand it as their attitude towards this matter, or as the positioning of the new and old forces, and so on. Shuofeng Qifan was taking care of things by his side. The location was still Qing Xian's abode of immortals. He had long treated this place as his own. Once he was done with it, he could just change to another place. How many tables do we need to prepare? I estimate that there are less than 400 cultivators in the interior realm right now. If half of them were to come, there would be plenty of tables and chairs. Where would I find them? Why don't we use stones to make up the numbers? It'll make it seem closer to nature. Qi Fan was a bit uncertain. The greatest difficulty of holding a banquet was that they didn't know how many guests would come. Without any preparations, they couldn't treat everyone equally. This was the beginning of a grudge. North Wind added, "There's also the banquet. We do have the food, but it's a bit messy. Don't tell me we'll have a duck on one table and a roast lamb on the other? There are hundreds of tables." Of course, it was impossible for cultivators to share tables at a banquet. It had to be a table for one person. In that case, it would be difficult to maintain consistency and it would be easy to distinguish the differences. Even if he didn't eat a single mouthful, you couldn't fool him. Lu Xiaoyi looked at them in amusement. What are you thinking? There's no need to prepare a table. If we're good friends, we won't care. Even if we came reluctantly, we won't stay for the banquet. We'll just say hello. The situation is unclear and the future is unclear. At this time, it's best to keep your position. Who would really sit down to eat and drink and call each other brothers? What I want is an attitude. They're just giving me an attitude. They're just stating the facts. It's not like we'll be on the same boat in the future. He guessed correctly. On the day of the banquet, all the celestials were present. It was very lively. Their attitudes were very polite and their gifts were dafa. They just didn't stay for the banquet. No matter what the reason was, there would always be a reason. It seemed like these people had communicated with each other, and everyone had the same attitude. Their meaning was, we can tolerate your massacre this time, but it doesn't mean that you can do it in the future. This was the normal behavior of the real top-level cultivation world. Everyone had their own pursuit. They wouldn't follow the crowd and curry favor with those in power. Cultivators who had opened their immortal wisdom were the most difficult group of people to converge with in this world. Moreover, his friends were basically outside. They were running around everywhere, searching for the traces of insects. In the land of the Yellow Dragon, those who stayed in the interior sky were mostly from the old faction. Although many people didn't participate in the confrontation between the old and new factions, they grieved for the loss of their own kind. It was very difficult for them to let go of the knot in their hearts. This was human nature. In the end, only 40 to 50 half-immortals stayed. Compared to the nearly 400 half-immortals who came to congratulate him, this was very awkward. These people had successfully expressed their attitude by not cooperating with him once. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. He raised his wine cup and greeted his friends. Therefore they will grow old. They will become history. Because they don't accept new things. They resist the trend and place themselves outside of the revolution. Some people call this persistence, the persistence of tradition. But what I want to ask is, where does tradition come from? Is it destined from birth? Isn't it the conclusion of the predecessors generation after generation and the revolution? If they really respect tradition so much, they should eat raw meat and drink blood forever, and not delude themselves about immortality. Everyone was deeply moved. This was a paradox. In the interior sky, which had always been famous for its ability and quality, people naturally felt superior to those in the exterior sky. But before the change of the era, its revolutionary power was far inferior to those in the exterior sky. It was very puzzling. The cultivation of ancient methods is a double-edged sword. It may be more natural, but it may also hurt oneself. We are cultivating ancient methods. It wasn't Chong Fa who followed the rules. What are ancient methods? Are all the methods of the ancients, the predecessors, and the history good? Do they all need to be followed meticulously? Even if they are already incompatible with the current environment and are not suitable for the times? What I want to say is, ancient is not only ancient. It is changing the ancient. The true essence of ancient methods doesn't lie in the divine skills and secret techniques that they created. It is the spirit of the predecessors who dared to innovate in a situation where they had nothing. Ancient is the struggle of the predecessors in the ancient environment. That's why there is the current cultivation world. Now the environment has changed and the era is about to change. Do we hold on to those so-called divine skills and secret techniques? Or do we follow the innovation spirit of the ancients who fought against the heavens, the earth, and the universe? I think it is the latter. So what we are creating now will eventually become ancient methods. This is the spirit of ancient methods. Instead of lying on the ancestors' things and not biting on them. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi explained his ideas in a slightly formal setting. Needless to say, the effect was good. He also started a debate about what ancient methods were in the interior sky. Amidst the vigorous debate, his ideas began to spread and deepened with the addition and perfection of his followers. The world was about to change. Chapter 2286. Lu Xiaoyi's interpretation of the ancient method in the interior heaven was embroiled in a huge debate. It was a clash between the old and the new, a battle between change and maintenance. More and more people were involved in it because it was related to everyone's future. Gradually, they forgot that there was someone who killed mercilessly in the interior heaven. Lu Xiaoyi had successfully diverted everyone's attention from the massacre, and at the same time, established himself as a new grandmaster of the ancient arts of the interior. If his circle in the past was loose, then this circle now had a trace of cohesion. This was the effect of theory guiding practice. He started to lead the ship officially. Unknowingly, Escort Lu did not jump into the whirlpool of debate. This was not the magnanimity of the originator of creativity. When there was a problem, his disciples would do the work. He would let the small fries fight for it first, while he would observe the changes and make notes. Then, he would draw conclusions from it, learn from it, and form a system. It was just like a group of people in a certain memory, quietly hiding behind a dark screen and watching the heated discussion in the book review section. They secretly laughed and wrote down the scenes that were helpful to them, while blacklisting the malicious victims. This was the power of the group. Who asked him to be the first to come up with such a theory? Testing the waters of a new concept. He continued to stay in the cave and work on his conception of the Great Way. The Great Way was real and could be transformed into something that could be used to fight. As for these abstract theories, it was just a pastime before tea. He waited here for his friends who had spread out, his inner circle. A month after the birthday party, an ordinary mortal came to the completely quiet abode of immortals. He was a villager at the foot of the mountain. In the interior world, some demi-immortals were willing to cover up their abode of immortals very deeply. They wanted to prevent unnecessary disturbances. However, there were also some who were indifferent. Their abode of immortals was neither steep nor hidden. They also did not prevent ordinary mortals from accidentally stumbling into their abode of immortals who got lost. This was decided by different personalities. Qing Xian's cave was like this. They did not avoid outside disturbances, so it was not impossible for ordinary people to find their way here. The villager sent him a gift, a birthday gift that came late. The reason why it was late was probably because the villager had been climbing the mountain. According to him, he had been climbing for a month. It was a jade slip. Lu Xiaoyi opened it, and the jade slip immediately turned into a breeze and dissipated, leaving no trace behind. However, the contents of the jade slip were clearly transmitted to him. It was a congratulatory letter from Sinbai. Of course, the congratulatory letter was only a pretext. The real content was something else. It was to humiliate his previous boast. Lu Xiaoyi closed his eyes. After a moment of silence, he sighed. This inexplicable warning made it difficult to distinguish whether it was real or fake. Fortunately, there was still time. He gave some gifts and sent the happy villagers down the mountain. With this kind of back and forth, he could live a happy life for many years. He continued to wait and study the great Tao. In his current situation, his focus was no longer on the existing 36 connate Daos. Instead, he focused on the newly created Daos of Star and Balance. Now, he had added Devour, Heavenly Tribulation, and Reincarnation. The last three were just in case. He really doubted whether no one would stand out to stop such a crucial and subversive Grand Tao from appearing. That would make him an enemy of almost all cultivators. It would greatly reduce the value of immortals. They would no longer be able to enjoy eternal peace once they succeeded like in the past. There would definitely be someone who would stop it in some way that he could never predict. He would not be able to guard against it. The only thing he could do was to quietly go against it. There were two problems in this. One was the problem of Star and Devour repelling each other. The great Tao of Star was the 5 ties plus 5 elements plus creation. The great Tao of Devour was the 5 ties plus destruction plus unification. He could only choose one of the two. They were two completely opposite directions of the formation of the universe. One eventually formed everything in the universe. The other's ultimate goal was to swallow the universe into a big hole. To him, a realistic problem was which one to choose in the end. If he could devour someone and successfully complete the Tao integration stage, then he would naturally choose the star he wanted. However, if no one came to complete the Tao integration stage, or if those who had the ability to complete the Tao integration stage all gave up due to various reasons, then he would have no choice but to give up on the star. The key was that the time left for him to make a decision might be very short. It would be the instant when the epoch changed. It was very difficult to grasp. Another problem was whether he needed to combine the great Tao of heavenly tribulation and the great Tao of lightning. The deeper his understanding of the heavenly tribulation, the more he felt this kind of urgency. Killing Immortal Pung was a little sloppy because his heavenly tribulation was not complete. If it wasn't for something he couldn't understand at the moment, Immortal Pung wouldn't have died. At most, it would have lost its physical body. The Tao realm part in the Immortal Court would still be safe. Theoretically, when the heavenly tribulation descended, no matter how many incarnations one had, none of them could escape. But now, he could only strike what was in front of him. He couldn't strike what was related to it. This was a huge flaw. After thinking about it, he could only pull the great Tao of lightning into it. But if he did that, wouldn't he destroy another innate great Tao? It was impossible for there to be two lightning systems in the world. This was different from the countless lightning orthodoxies in the main world. That was only a superficial difference. There could only be one basic thing. These things all needed a lot of time to perfect. To be honest, some of them were beyond his ability. His limit was the two new great Taos. As for the rest, he could only rely on Marching Monk, Qing Xian, Senior Sister and the others to perfect them. What else could he learn from them? Since he started cultivating, many great Taos that he knew had appeared. For example, Pure Yang, Illusionary Dream, Life, and even the Great Peng's Emptiness. He was working hard, but the others weren't idle either. He actually wanted to go to the land of Yellow Dragon. Everyone had the same thought. Bei Feng and Qi Fan, who helped him set up the banquet, also started their journey early after the banquet. They had been waiting for this day for a long time. After the matter with Lu Xiaoyi came to an end, they naturally wanted to pursue their own future. There, it was said that nearly 1,000 Tao tablets had been erected there. Just thinking about it made them excited. They could see the thoughts of the most outstanding people in the universe colliding. At the moment before the arrival of the new era, they would decide who was better. Which great Taos would be better. Which great Taos would fall into the dust. But he still restrained the desire in his heart. Because he vaguely felt that the time wasn't right yet. The great Taos that appeared now were still unimportant and didn't have much hope. There weren't many great Taos that were truly competitive. He needed to discuss with his friends in the fifth ring. From White Tiger, he learned a lot of history and understood the overall structure of the sect. It was actually the structure set by Li Wuyao. He wanted the fifth ring to appear as a whole in front of the universe's cultivation world. Chapter 2287. He wasn't completely grateful to his five-ringed companions for their support during Xuanyuan's difficult times. In fact, they wouldn't stick to a promise made to a dead person, even if he was once a Daluo Golden Immortal. But since they insisted, it must be because they saw something. Or perhaps there was a reason why they had no choice but to support him. At the same time, Lu Xiaoyi's current behavior was also very complicated. He had a deep personal friendship, and he had helped him in the past. More importantly, in the future, Xuanyuan would not be able to shoulder everything alone. They needed strong and close helpers. There was no other way except for Taoism. Therefore, carrying and hugging each other, tolerating each other's bad breath, smelly armpits, and skin diseases, and working together to move forward, this was the most tested friendship. Qi Jingtian calmed down again. Except for the aftermath of the collision of ideas and the bamboo hat who was still conscientiously looking for insects, he didn't arrange for escort Lu anymore. This guy wasn't easy to serve. It was better to stay away from him. Lu Xiaoyi's luck was strange. He had encountered 2 groups of Zerg's red light. Previously, everyone worked together to deal with another group. Now, he heard that they found another one? It seemed that there weren't many places in the universe with insect infestations. It would be a long process, and they wouldn't appear together like now. But it was hard to say whether they could be wiped out. Therefore, the bamboo hat's mission was really a hot potato. It would follow him until the new era came. Because no one knew how many groups would be wiped out? From this point of view, it was a good thing that Heaven's Eyes didn't assign the mission to Lu Xiaoyi. His friends started to come back one after another. After a short reunion, everyone took care of themselves. Then, they went their separate ways, except for the 5-ringed companions. 2 years later, the 4-man team of 5 rings gathered again. Looking at the lively people, Lu Xiaoyi was a little depressed. So he was the only one who had encountered such bad luck? Everyone else was safe and sound, but he was the only one who was. Why are you all okay? Am I the only unlucky one? We're all mortal. How can we tell who's better and who's worse? Qing Xian was not polite at all. Making a move on you is the main topic. There's nothing wrong with that. Shishi's face was filled with envy. Little E, just how difficult is the immortal rock? Tell me about it. Only Smoky Terminator remained silent. His only old acquaintance had left. His former junior brother's lively figure seemed to be right in front of him, as if it was yesterday. This time, the focus of this gathering was Lu Xiaoyi, because in the past few years, more than 10 half-immortals were killed by him. The record was steadily approaching the 100th place. It was only a short distance away. There was even a real immortal among them. As she listened to Qin Yu's simple description of his battle with the immortal rock, his eyes lit up. This is a good idea. Was it just a little despicable? But it doesn't matter. There's no need to talk about elegance when fighting with immortals. Why don't we practice this kind of battle technique as well? Qing Xian snorted. What's there to train? Every opponent had a different method, so how could there be a conclusion? Generally speaking, this method is suitable for dealing with demonic beasts with strong bodies, but why would it be so troublesome to deal with normal demonic beasts from the lower realm? There was one thing he didn't say, and that was that he had to kill one or more of his fellow disciples. Strictly speaking, this battle wasn't worth it, but how could the situation at that time be judged after the fact? Chong Lu was not only Xuanyuan's elder, but also the elder of the 5th Ring region. He was currently the oldest treasure in the entire 5th Ring region. Unfortunately, he left just like that. Did Xiao Lu leave any words before he left? Smoky Terminator was now speaking with Bulien's identity, so the other 3 could only listen obediently. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It was too intense at that time, so how could I have time to pass on my thoughts? I was fighting the immortal rock at the front, so to be honest, I didn't have time to observe the situation at the back. I was beaten very badly by the immortal rock. But before the battle began, Senior Brother said that you have to listen to me in the future. Smoky Terminator glared. Why? Even Chong Lu wasn't qualified, let alone you. Among these people, I'm the most senior, so you should all listen to me. Lu Xiaoyi revealed his true intentions. I knew senior sister valued seniority the most, so I wouldn't overstep it. By the way, Senior White Tiger wants you to go, it has something to say to you. Only then did Smoky Terminator know that this guy was waiting for her here, but she couldn't say anything. On the side, she interrupted, since this matter is over, and Xiao Yi even took revenge himself. He didn't leave us any chance. Those Taoists don't appear in the world, so there's nowhere to find them. The immortal rock is the same, so we can only go wherever we find them. Since there's nothing to do, why don't we go to the land of the Yellow Dragon? Although the matter of setting up the Tao tablets isn't urgent, it's still good to go early and see what's good about them. Then we'll find a chance to set up our own Tao and accept the challenge? This was the right thing to do, except for Smoky Terminator, who was still a little unwilling. She really wanted to kill something, but as she said, Lu Xiaoyi had already killed all the people that could be killed. The rest were people who couldn't find the right person in a hurry. She had nowhere to vent her anger, which made her very depressed. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I want to go home and stay for a while. When we go to the land of the Yellow Dragon, the situation will change, and I'm afraid we won't have time to go back. We have to leave something behind? Only then can we live up to the sect that raised us. She laughed dryly. Xiao Yi, you've killed too many people, so you're starting to be sentimental? Lu Xiaoyi looked at him and said bluntly, How long have you not returned to the fifth ring? She thought for a moment. I didn't count carefully, but at least 1,000 years? It's not that I don't want to, but I can't find the opportunity. There's always this kind of thing that hinders you, so you can't get away. He looked at Qin Xian. What about you? Qin Xian didn't hesitate. 1,583 years. Lu Xiaoyi finally turned his head, but Yan Qing didn't need him to ask. Less than 600 years. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Look, the shortest is 600 years. In other words, it's a complete growth period of Jin Dan. How many years until the new era? If it was fast, it would take at least 1,000 years. If it was slow, it wouldn't take more than 3,000 years. To the people at home, this might be the change of a few generations, but to us, it's just the blink of an eye. Qin Xian understood something. Then let's go back. Let's go back together. Let's have some fun in the fifth ring and leave a memento. She was interested. Okay, the interior realm half-immortals are going home to visit their families. This can be considered as returning home in glory, right? Lu Xiaoyi looked at them and said something shocking. No, not just us. Don't leave out the exterior realm half-immortals. They're all fifth ring wanderers, so we shouldn't leave them behind. Let's each inform the fifth ring half-immortals in the exterior realm half-immortals, and let's go back together. No one will be left behind. The three of them stared at Lu Xiaoyi, and their expressions became serious. This was no longer returning home in glory. Chapter 2288. In the fifth ring, a huge figure streaked across the sky, just like it had been for tens of thousands of years, firm, silent, and unchanging. The change of the epoch seemed to have no effect on them, but in fact, it was the same for every realm. The ones who were affected were the half-immortals who had the hope of taking the next step. The Foundation establishment Jin Dan could only be happy, Yuanying drooling, and the perfected lords were anxious, unable to find a way to enter. At this time, the footsteps of the new epoch had gradually become clearer. It would happen in 1,000 or 2,000 years, or at the latest 3,000 years. If a cultivator was still a perfected lord, then there was basically no hope of catching the last bus. There might be a chance for the Yang spirit, but the primordial spirit and Yin spirit could only look on helplessly. 1, 2, 3, 4 hurdles, and there was simply not enough time to build one's own great Tao. Therefore, without any other choice, they had to do what they had to do. Even though there was no hope, they still did not know it and desperately rushed forward. If they went crazy and even their original rhythm was disrupted, then the gains would not make up for the losses. Cultivators, the most important thing was self-awareness. Most people knew this in their hearts. The fifth ring was still thriving and full of vitality. The vast domain was the stage for the building foundation stage cultivators to show off their skills. Conflicts never ceased, and fights never stopped. The competition between the lower levels of power was an eternal and unchanging rhythm. This made the young people understand early on the cruelty of the cultivation world. The gold core cultivators were a little more reserved, but they couldn't hold back their surging hearts. In this turbulent era, if they took another step forward, They would be able to come into contact with the void of the universe and enter the magnificent cosmic tide. The impact of several cosmic wars had yet to be eliminated, and everyone wanted to be qualified to participate in the next great war before it came. This was the best era, but also the cruelest era. Everyone had to find their own place and plan for their own future. They sincerely hoped that they could hold on until the arrival of the new epoch. At this time in the fifth ring, the atmosphere of cultivation had reached the highest level in history. Who knew if this was a good thing for the realm? Or a bad thing? The peak of prosperity was followed by a decline. The more cultivators there were, the greater the number of people sucking the blood out of a mother with 5 rings. The enormous numbers would accumulate over time. Of course, right now, no one would consider the changes that would happen in a few 100,000 years, or even hundreds of thousands of years. Human eyes couldn't see that far. The children were fighting and the older children were quarreling. It was a noisy domain, but what was revealed was incomparable confidence. On this day, the wind was gentle and the sun was bright, the sky clear and boundless. Amidst the early autumn breeze, the entire fifth ring was brimming with vitality. On the 20,000-year anniversary of the establishment of the 5 rings, the entire realm was in a state of celebration. There were even cultivators from friendly alliances who came from afar to join in this grand celebration. As a rare super-large star region in the universe, if one were to count the years, it would be impossible to count. One would have to trace it back to the ancient times. After it had produced spiritual opportunity and had cultivators, it had changed owners many times. It was not until the appearance of the infamous Sirius star in the universe that this region appeared in front of the universe cultivation world for the first time. Therefore, it was impossible to calculate the birthday of a domain. The 20,000-year birthday referred to the moment when the domain changed its name. 20,000 years ago, after the Universe Alliance army led by Zhuo Zhou occupied the Sirius star, they divided the fruits of victory and renamed it. 20,000 years ago. This was a very important milestone, so a celebration was necessary. They had only held such a celebration ceremony once before during the 10,000-year celebration 10,000 years ago. The next time would be after the new era. What would happen then? Only the heavens knew. The final celebration? Perhaps. However, the fifth ring's performance in the past 2,000 years had indeed made people's eyes light up. In 2 universe wars they had the last laugh. Not only did they protect the domain, but they also took down the Hung River realm, which was also a super-large realm, in a world-ending battle. This made people look at them in a new light, and they became one of the brightest stars in the universe 4 divisions. With such a status, when the fifth ring celebration was held, there were naturally countless guests who came to congratulate them. Almost no one from the surrounding 10 universes was left out, and those from even further away were basically perfected lords. Very few people were disappointed with this trip to the fifth ring, because this was not just a simple celebration ceremony. There were also powerful cultivation orthodoxies, showing off the fifth ring's heritage to the guests. Of course, the Cultivation World's festivals would not last for just a few days. Various Dharma conferences had started many years ago, and would continue for many more years. The entire Cultivation World's celebration would last for more than 10 years before it slowly died down. In all the 5 ring orthodoxies, the peak of the spiritual assembly level was the Xian Yuan, the 3 pure ones, and the supreme ones. It was a lively scene. No matter where you came from, no matter which school you belonged to, there would always be someone who could satisfy you. Of course, with the exception of Buddhism, there were all sorts of orthodoxies in the fifth ring, except for Buddhism. It was also because of this that some busybodies called this place the Holy Land of Taoism. It was a mix of respect and flattery, and everyone was bustling with activity. It was a grand occasion for cultivation in the eastern elephant heavens. For the sake of fun, the 5 Rings Summit, which was held once every 300 years, was also held during this period. However, it was no longer limited to the 5 rings, but more like the Eastern Elephant Summit. This was not a joke, but something determined by strength. The 5 rings were the peak of the cultivation world, and this gave them such confidence. The summit was held at the dome, Xuanyuan's mountain gate. This was not fought for by the swordsman, but by the decisive battle against Sirius 20,000 years ago. Because the 5 rings tradition was not to hold the summit outside space, but within the atmosphere, the intention was that everyone could participate regardless of their cultivation level. Therefore, it was a sea of people, and tens of thousands of heads were gathered. Guandu, Chongjin, and Qing Yangzi looked at the grand occasion from afar and sighed. How many 5 rings cultivators had sacrificed in exchange for this? They really hoped that the golden age would last forever, and that time would stop, forever frozen in this moment. This was practically the peak of a realm, right? For a notorious bandit star to be able to make it this far, it was truly the heavens that were blind. Just as the 3 of them were sighing, they suddenly felt something strange in the sky. There was an unusually strong aura stirring up the clouds. This was not an adjective. Someone was really stirring up the clouds. The clouds in the entire 5 rings began to change violently, but there was not a trace of madness outside. It was just the clouds gathering, dispersing, and combining. Qing Yangzi frowned. What's going on? Are the people outside all dead? Someone is stirring up trouble outside space, and there's not even a message coming back? The 5 rings was such a big event, so it was impossible for there to be no preparations outside space, especially for the 5 rings, which was on the brink of war all year round. The grander the occasion, the more power there would be outside. Xianyuan, Supreme, and 3 Pure Ones had dozens of perfected monarchs protecting them outside, and there were even several peak yang gods among them. How could there be no movement at all, and the entire realm's winds and clouds be directly controlled by someone? Just as they were about to react, countless clouds had finished gathering, forming a line of large words in the sky: the 5 rings 10,000 flowers birthday, wanderers return home to celebrate. Below were the names of their subordinates: Lu Xiaoi, Qing Xian, Shi Shi, Yan Cheng, Gu Jia, Lian Bai, Fang Zhouzi, Ting Xie, Yi Fangshi, Zhong Yuanhua, Chu Bai, Zhou Xing. For a moment, the entire 5 rings fell into a frenzy, and deafening cheers resounded through the clouds. There were so many thighs that they did not know which to hug. Chapter 2289. When characters that could only be seen in sect portraits or heard of in legends appeared before everyone's eyes, the atmosphere in the 5th ring was pushed to its peak. Chong Jin's eyes were moist. This was a situation that had never happened in thousands of years. Even someone as strong as his son's spirit couldn't control himself. These guys are too troublesome. Can't they keep a low profile and be more stable? Why do they have to make people? Qing Yangzi laughed heartily. I'm happy today. Let them be. Who cares about being reserved and low profile? We 5th ring people don't care about that. Guandu's wrinkled face was full of wrinkles. This kid likes to do these superficial things. He's trying to earn the tears of some old guy who has lived for thousands of years. Old man Chongjin, can your crocodile tears still fall? Everyone's still waiting. Actually, most of the people who came back were the elders of these old guys. They were even older guys who had lived for more than 10,000 years in the exterior realm. However, there was no concept of time in cultivation. They had endured a lot of hardship in the lower realms. To the exterior realm cultivators, it was nothing more than a deep meditation. The order was a little messy because of the complexity of seniority. It was hard to imagine how people of different ages in a sect would refer to each other as granduncle or granduncle, especially when the time span was more than 10,000 years. Of course, this was a happy annoyance. Small sects couldn't have this annoyance even if they wanted to. There were a total of 43 half-immortals. Among them, there were 5 from Xianyuan. The 3 heavyweights together accounted for more than half of the sect. The remaining half-immortals were the only seedlings of the exterior realm in the 5th ring great orthodoxies. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call them Dudingting? Just in the 5th ring great orthodoxies, there were close to 20 orthodoxies with half-immortals. This showed how deep their foundation was. While the 3 heavyweights were dominating, there was still a backbone. This could only mean one thing. In the 5th ring cultivation system, when one reached the Yuanying realm and above, internal strife was very weak. Internal strife was replaced by external strife. This was the true essence of the bandits' invasion. Such a grand occasion made many of the guests sigh in envy. A single domain had cultivated 43 half-immortals. It was a well-deserved reputation of being a powerful realm in the universe. They didn't know it usually, but when it was revealed, it was truly shocking. At least in the eastern elephant heavens, no domain could compare to it. How did a notorious plundering star field develop to such a level? This question was very thought-provoking. In the Sea of Joy, there was no need to say anything. They just had to kowtow and call him ancestor. The 4-man team of interior experts of the 5th ring had long been separated by the crowd. In such an occasion, they had no choice but to lower their status and enjoy the fun with the crowd. Otherwise, why did they come back if they put on airs and pretended to be aloof? In fact, the world of cultivators was no different from ordinary mortal families celebrating together for several generations. It was not easy to meet each other, and when they met again, it was already a new era. Things had changed, and people had changed, so they had to cherish it. Comparatively speaking, Xianyuan had fewer people, but it was no less lively than the 3 pure ones, because the swordsmen were more straightforward and unbridled. They didn't attach as much importance to the difference in seniority as the old-fashioned orthodoxies. For example, the 3 pure ones were like a group meeting, bowing down layer by layer. On average, a perfected lord wouldn't be able to pass this stage without kowtowing 100 times. Of course, they were comfortable and willing to kowtow. The center of Xuanyuan's liveliness was not Lu Xiaoyi and Yanqing, because they had occasionally shown their faces on the dome and often met each other. The rare things were Ting Xie, Chu Bai, and Zhou Xing, who each had an inner and outer sword vein. The youngest one hadn't returned to the mountain for 3,000 years. Now that he was back, there was no difference between the sword vein. I hope this scene lasts forever and lives up to what I've learned in a lifetime. It's a pity that Lao Bai still doesn't want to come back. Yanqing sighed. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, "We're a family, so we have to be united. That's why I hate cultivators who alienate each other and do their own thing. They only show up when it's a matter of life and death. This isn't a novel. Life is short, so why not enjoy it while it lasts?" Yanqing looked at him. "Xiaoyi, although this kind of grand occasion is indeed unprecedented, and the reunion of the 5 rings is also very necessary. It's a good way to boost morale and inspire people. But I still want to ask, what's the real reason why you insisted on bringing everyone back? You have to know that you're the only one in the 5 rings who has this kind of charisma. Don't easily use this kind of charisma to exaggerate prosperity and gloss over peace." Lu Xiaoyi sighed. "Let's have some fun for a few days first. It's such a good day, so don't use unpleasant things to affect this kind of atmosphere. It's not that I don't want to tell you, but senior apprentice sister, you wear everything on your face. Once your great-grandmother has a thought, the people below will let their imaginations run wild. Ah, great-grandmother's brows are tightly furrowed. Who made great-grandmother angry? No one dares to offend you in terms of strength. Could it be that there's a problem in your relationship and you've been abandoned?" Yanqing glared and was about to fly into a rage when Lu Xiaoyi hurriedly said, "Stop! Look, they're coming over. They're going to pay their respects to the most senior great-grandmother in Xianyuan." Yanqing turned around and saw 3 old exterior half-immortals leading a large group of Yuanying supremes over. Their meaning couldn't be more obvious. She snorted and turned to greet them, but took the lead to bow down. Reincarnated people don't care about the previous life, only this life. When it comes to reincarnation, I think there's no need for everyone to bow to each other. It's not clear whose ancestor is. Xiaoyi, come over here. You're the lowest in seniority here. Why don't you come over and serve us? Well, everyone was in a mess. No one knew who was bowing to whom, and no one paid attention to it. They were just doing it half-heartedly. The key was this kind of atmosphere, not specific seniority. They enjoyed the process, not who was older than the other. The bustle was still going on, and it was getting more and more intense. Since each orthodoxy had bowed to each other, they also had to bow to each other. If they really bowed to each other, it would be too noisy and disorderly. It wasn't the style of cultivators. Therefore, a few of the oldest half-immortals suggested that they shouldn't mix with each other. They might as well all the half-immortals go up on stage together to receive everyone's respect. This way there wouldn't be too much red tape. It was a good idea. Therefore, under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, well, 10,000 was no longer accurate. There were already more than 1,000,000 people. Fortunately, everyone could fly, so there was no need to worry too much about the size of the venue. 43 half-immortals stood in the air. There was only one word to describe them: domineering. It was truly a scene of prosperity. They had the demeanor of an immortal, and their figures were like immortals. This was the template of all the fifth ring cultivators. Of course, this included many guests. They couldn't help but feel enlightened. When would their own realm be so prestigious? Chang Jin, Qin Yangzi, and Guan Du praised them one by one and briefly described their orthodoxies. The half-immortals whose names were mentioned took a step forward and received the cheers of the crowd. They bowed to each other. One after another, the momentum became louder and louder, and the cheers became more and more uniform. It was done on purpose. Lu Xiaoyi was the last half-immortal to be called. When Guan Du said a word, "Next, it's Lu," there was already a landslide and a tsunami below. Glutton immortal. Chapter 2290. In Lu Xiaoyi's 3,000 years of cultivation, he had countless nicknames in different periods, with different characteristics, different occasions, and different groups of people. However, most of them were not pleasant to hear, and he enjoyed them. It didn't matter if they were unpleasant to hear. It was just a symbol, and he didn't care. But this time, everyone called him Glutton Immortal with enough momentum. But it made him feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. This was indeed not the so-called flattery, but the sincerity of all the fifth ring cultivators. Perhaps it was the hidden ambition of every cultivator, the ambition to subvert everything. Especially for cultivators who grew up in a cultivation environment like the fifth ring. In the fifth ring, he had never done anything to improve his reputation, but the world was so wonderful. He had almost no legends in the fifth ring, but it was precisely because of this that he received extremely high recognition here. It was not only Xianyuan, not only the Sword Vein, but also the various Taoist factions of all sizes. The reason was simple. His legends were all outside. In the universe. In the outer region. In other celestial bodies. People respected a person, and of course, they loved those who did not have any internal strife, but killed in external battles. Lu Xiaoyi was such an outstanding representative. Ever since he became a nascent soul cultivator, he had never had anything to do with a cultivator of the same level as him, all the way until he became a perfected cultivator, and now a half-immortal. The fifth ring cultivators could only hear one kind of news. How many demigods had Lu Tixing killed? Lu Tixing had begun to slay immortals. He had truly become the fifth ring's calling card to the outside world. There was no need to make any arrangements, no need to rope him in, and no need to pressure him. He had become the only voice. The reason was very simple. The other demigods might not have gained as much as him in the past 10,000 years. There was only one reason, and there was no need to say more. He did not do anything. He drifted in the void of the universe, but after 3,000 years of cultivation, he truly became the ruler of a super realm. Thinking back to that foreign kid from 3,000 years ago who was full of reluctance, grumbling, and rubbing the itch, this situation was truly unprecedented. He did something that even Li Wuya could not do. Because he did not use the sword, but the momentum. The momentum was both external and internal, and everyone obeyed. Everything was going according to plan. This was his fifth ring. In the future, it would still be his universe. He seemed to be getting a little carried away. Lu Xiaoyi nudged his senior sister beside him. Sister, pinch me. The grand event of the fifth ring that lasted for 20,000 years had finally begun. This time, there were no boundaries of Tao orthodoxies, no so-called laws that couldn't be spread to 6 ears, and no hiding between each other. Everything was open. In the entire lifetime of the million cultivators present, how many of them had ever seen a half-immortal perform magic? This time, they finally saw it, and it wasn't just one, but dozens. Oftentimes, there would be a few half-immortals performing magic at the same time, making people wish they could grow a few more ears and a few more eyes. Happiness came too suddenly, and it was unexpected. Thus, there was the distress of happiness. Which one should I listen to? It was like a poor child who grew up in a remote village and suddenly came to the most luxurious restaurant in the city for a buffet. This affliction was always with the monks, and they hoped that this affliction would last forever. Lu Xiaoyi smiled as he looked at the grand occasion in front of him. Wasn't the reason why he worked so hard for his family's happiness? What's the point of keeping those good things forever? Or should he just bury a hole and wait for the so-called fated person? That would be an extremely stupid way of doing things. How could one person's gratitude compare to thousands of people's gratitude? This was what he hoped to see, and he looked forward to the birth of more talents under this grand occasion. Because the new era had just begun. Others were looking at the era before the change, but he was also looking at the era after the change. 10,000 years after the new era, the great Tao would belong to someone, and that would be the most crucial time to establish a sect. Whether or not one could take advantage of the situation, it would determine the direction of the future for hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years. And these seeds were all among these people. While Lu Xiaoyi was intoxicated by his wild imagination, 3 people unknowingly surrounded him. Just as he was about to run away, he was pulled back by one of them. Where are you going? Hurry up and tell us the truth. Looking at his 3 old friends, Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Life is short, why not enjoy it while it lasts? I say, what's wrong with the 3 of you? Are you feeling uncomfortable because you're living comfortably? Why do you have to get to the bottom of things that aren't the most urgent matter right now? Qin Xian stared at him. If it wasn't urgent, you wouldn't have summoned all the 5th ring half-immortals here. It's just a matter of a few days. Why do you have to keep it in your heart? If you suddenly wind up dead at night, won't everyone become headless flies? Ma Lu, you really know how to talk. I won't wind up dead at night, I'll go crazy immediately, okay? Looking at them, he knew that he couldn't hide anymore, so he had no choice but to tell the truth. I've received news. It's just ahead of the 5th ring's trajectory, and there might be an unavoidable large-scale astronomical phenomenon. If the 5th ring continues to move like this, the bounded domain might disappear. Yan Chen's eyes widened. What? Such a big matter, and you actually kept us in the dark, and you still want to enjoy it while it lasts? Lu Xiaoyi, do you have any heart at all? What astronomical phenomenon is it? What's its nature? How far away is it? How long will it last? Is it natural or man-made? Lu Xiaoyi spread out his hands. I don't know. It's just a vague warning. I don't know anything else. We can only look for it ourselves. Qin Xian stared at him. You're exaggerating. In the past 20,000 years, the fifth ring has never neglected its investigation of the voyage ahead. We've also experienced many collisions with large celestial bodies on the trajectory of the voyage. We've avoided all of them, because there are countless fifth ring cultivators in the course of the voyage ahead of us. I don't know where your news came from, but under such circumstances, do you still think that this kind of danger is possible? Lu Xiaoyi nodded lightly. This was because of someone's warning, and also because of his own intuition. It was just that his intuition was too vague, and he didn't know where the danger came from. When he had mastered more than half of the 36 innate Daos, he had gained an understanding similar to the universe. Although it wasn't that clear, when he combined the two together, he took Tsunbai's warning very seriously. In the cultivation world, nothing was impossible. In the void of the universe, nothing was always smooth sailing. Qing Xian nodded. She knew this person too well. It was normal for him to be unreliable in small matters, but he had never made a mistake in big matters. The bigger the matter, the more he was like this. In that case, let's make arrangements. Half immortals will be dispatched to thoroughly investigate the trajectory ahead of the fifth ring and eliminate the hidden dangers. Shi, who hadn't spoken all this time, had a serious expression. No, not just the trajectory. We have to expand the scope. We have to raise the chain reaction of astronomical phenomena. This includes the astronomical phenomena that may affect the ship's trajectory in the future. Chapter 2291. In the void of the universe, the operation of celestial bodies and astronomical phenomena was an extremely complicated system. It was both disorderly and orderly. It was impossible to draw such a trajectory that was completely safe and undisturbed. This involved extremely complicated calculations. In the past 20,000 years, under the careful efforts of the people of the fifth ring, nothing major had happened. Occasionally, the trajectories of other celestial phenomena would be dealt with by the cultivators in advance. They would be moved away or directly blown up. They could even slightly change the trajectory of the fifth ring to a certain extent to avoid collision. As for the meteors and meteorites that were everywhere in the void of the universe, of course, they would not spend so much effort. In the past, a few perfected cultivators could directly destroy them. The most serious incident in history was just a huge comet tail. Because the range was too big, it was impossible to avoid it. Therefore, all the people of the fifth ring were mobilized. Perfected cultivators and Yun-Ing were all involved. When the fifth ring and the comet tail collided, they dug out a big hole in the comet tail, preventing countless large and small meteorites from falling into the fifth ring. This was also something that happened 10,000 years ago. Then this time, how serious was the so-called serious situation? No one knew. If it was someone else who reminded them, they would most likely think that he was trying to mislead them. But if it was Escort Lu, then they had to take it seriously. Because of his unique ability, because of the higher and wider level of contact he had. But before this, Qing Xian began to stir up the situation again. He was already used to it. Escort Lu would ask questions, and then they would come up with solutions. I will immediately go and ask for a summary of the star map of the 100-year track, then we will consider how to expand the range. Shi is right. If it was a single celestial phenomenon, we would not have missed it. If there is a problem, then it must be the complicated changes in the celestial phenomena around the track. This requires a large number of people. We can leak the news in advance. After all, we rarely come back and don't know much about the situation. This kind of situation was actually not suitable to hold a meeting and announce it in public. There were many things to consider. For example, would it affect the progress of the grand occasion? Would it cause panic? Would it be fake news? If there was a mistake in judgment, then it would be a big joke. This showed that under the fearless appearance of the people of the fifth ring, they were actually in a state of fear and trepidation. Lu Xiaoyi did not care. Wasn't it normal to be worried about the base of one's sect? But some people didn't think so. Just like Qing Xian and the rest, they hoped to limit the number of people who knew about it to a smaller range, instead of spreading fake news everywhere. The Fifth Ring Road was flourishing and thriving, but there were many people in the cultivation world who couldn't bear to see others doing well. They didn't dare to do anything openly, but there were plenty of people who could spread rumors behind people's backs or pass on a message. In fact, it was also to protect Lu Xiaoyi's authority in the new organization. A revolution needed a leader. Since this was unavoidable, why not choose one of their own? This was the simplest way of thinking of Qing Xian and the other two. Lu Xiaoyi could not reject them. His status was different now. No matter what he did, there were countless pairs of eyes watching him. He could no longer go back to the days when he could come and go freely. This was the price of growth. If you gain something, you are destined to lose something. His current understanding was not too deep, but one day, he would deeply reflect on what he had gained but lost something more important. Was it worth it? In the circle of Fifth Ring half-immortals, the issue of the trajectory of the Fifth Ring Road began to spread. For everyone, this was not a problem at all. From the day they started cultivating, they had never worried about it. It was as if it was a matter of course, and there would be no obstacles in the direction of the Fifth Ring Road. This was not right. Even the immortal court had encountered obstacles in the process of development, let alone a mere lower realm. Soon, a consensus was reached. This was because Escort Lu's gathering this time seemed to have an ulterior motive. It was simply for this matter, and not simply for the so-called celebration ceremony. With this awareness, everything became faster, because you didn't know what level of perception and existence that could kill immortals had reached. Lifespan, this time, lost to the heavens chosen. The core was that they needed to tightly unite around Escort Lu, the new revolutionary force, so that everyone could eat more easily in the new era. Thus, they began to divide the area. In the next 100 years of the trajectory of the Fifth Ring Road, a clear curve was marked, and then using this curve as the basis, a universe was expanded. In Qing Xian's words, if they could not find anything, then they would continue to expand the scope. However, doing so would use more power, and it would be difficult to completely block the news, which might cause panic to spread in the Fifth Ring Road. If it spread among the mortals, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if the Fifth Ring Road's current cultivation system was prosperous and powerful, it was impossible to take away 10 billion people. After the climax of the Dharma Development Conference, the half-immortals began to bid farewell and leave. Although they were reluctant and felt a little rushed, everyone could still understand. After all, facing the arrival of the new era, these half-immortals had a heavy burden on their shoulders. They could not ruin the important matter just because of a speech. Everyone understood the importance of this matter. Among the non-half-immortals, only 4 people were informed. Before Lu Xiaoyi and the last batch of half-immortals embarked on their journey, they needed these old cultivators to stabilize the situation. 3 pure Yangzi, Xianyuan Guandu, Wushang Changjin, and Jialan Tongyan. That's about it. I've estimated that the Fifth Ring Road's 100 years of travel distance is about a year for a half-immortal to fly normally. With this as the axis, we will expand the universe in all directions and search for abnormal celestial phenomena that might appear. Then, we will summarize and analyze to see if there is anything worth paying attention to. Listening to Qing Xian's explanation, the 4 old cultivators frowned. This news was too shocking, and they were at a loss. This was digging up the roots of the Fifth Ring Road. The roots of cultivators were mortals. Without a huge base of mortals, it would be like water without roots, a tree without fate, and it would not be sustainable. What if we can't find it? Guan Du pointed out the core of the problem. Qing Xian explained softly, if we can't find it, we can only expand the scope. Even if the celestial phenomena are too far away, especially the large-scale ones, they are not too fast, and it is impossible for them to hit the fifth ring road's track in this period of time. In addition, we will expand the scope of the search. Not the 100-year track of the fifth ring road, but the 200-year track. But you should know that if the distance is extended and the scope is expanded, it means that we will need more manpower, a lot of manpower. This will require the fifth ring road to make arrangements. Not only will we need to send out manpower, but we also need to stabilize the fifth ring road. We can't cause a disturbance in the mortal world just because the news is leaked. Only you can do this. Chapter 2292. Chang Jin let out a long sigh and looked at Lu Xiaoyi. Your idea? Lu Xiaoyi habitually denied responsibility. It's none of my business. I was just dreaming at night and had an epiphany. I told them about it and they believed it. Chang Jin had long known about this guy's mischievous personality and couldn't ask for much. He was completely different from the wise and powerful person in the eyes of others. The real Lu Ruoxian was someone who wanted nothing more than to hide and let others do the work. But then again, it was because of this personality that everyone almost unanimously regarded him as the leader. Otherwise, if it was someone who wanted to take care of everything, big or small, everyone would be afraid that his sword Vane's hands would stretch too far. The interactions between people were truly wondrous. It was as profound as the great Tao. Chang Jin thought for a moment. Very good. Dafa is right, but we have to consider more details. For example, in the hands of people, although passing it to more people might lead to the suspicion of leaking the secret, in our fifth ring, the great cultivators are still very reliable, especially those supremes who clear the obstacles for the fifth ring all year round. They have no regrets their whole lives and keep their mouths shut. Such a big matter shouldn't be hidden from them, and they are much more familiar with the surrounding weather than you guys. I think that if we let them help you guys first, you can get twice the result with half the effort. The few youngsters nodded. The older the ginger, the spicier it was. In terms of specific matters, these old foxes who had been in charge of the sect all their lives were meticulous and meticulous. Qin Yangzi also said, we also have to establish a stable communication channel. We can't just rely on people to fly. Otherwise, it will delay the important matter. I feel that there is no need for you guys to personally go out and search. Are you guys the only ones missing? Why don't you stay in the fifth ring and lead the overall situation? We also need these few people to be the leaders here. Where to investigate, which direction to suspect, which airspace to focus on. We can't just swarm like bees, right? The allocation of personnel also needs to be controlled. We have to make sure that there is a master and a subordinate and that there is tacit cooperation. Qing Xian humbly listened to the advice. You're right. Originally, we wanted you to be the host. Guan Du waved his hand. Everyone has their own responsibilities. In this kind of situation, do you think it's appropriate for us sun gods to take charge? This is the cultivation world, not the bureaucracy of seniority. We will be responsible for providing reliable manpower. Just tell us how many people you need. Also, to ensure the stability of the fifth ring, we must make an example of those who spread false rumors. In short, the matters within the void are our duties, and the matters outside the void are the world of you youngsters. Don't mix it up. Tong Yen, who had been silent all this time, smiled. Don't forget about the negative space. In theory, the positive and negative spaces were not connected to each other, but that was normal. The universe was in chaos, and the space order was also showing signs of instability. On the outside, the celestial bodies of the main worlds that had appeared had mysteriously disappeared. In fact, they had accidentally broken through the space barrier. At present, there hasn't been a situation where an anti-space celestial phenomenon has appeared in the main world, but since the main world's celestial bodies have gone, of course, anti-space celestial bodies can come. It's just that anti-space celestial bodies are rare, so it's not common. The three people from Qingxian were startled. They, the half-immortals, had not considered this matter, but these old Yang spirit seniors had considered it. It was truly shameful. Of course, everyone had their strengths and weaknesses. The half-immortals often stayed in the inner and outer scenic skies, so they knew very little about the changes in the main world. Moreover, most of their attention was placed on the Great Tao, so they were not as sensitive to the surrounding universe as the true monarchs of the lower realm. This was understandable. The three of them bowed to Tong Yen. This was a big matter, a very important direction. Fortunately, with the senior's reminder, they did not miss it. Yen Chen fiercely stepped on a certain person who was indifferent and whose soul had wandered outside the void. Lu Xiaoyi, Senior has filled in such a big loophole for you, and you're still distracted here. Only then did Lu Xiaoyi recover from his Tao realm world. He was also smart and hurriedly bowed, but he was unwilling to admit defeat. What does this have to do with me? Didn't I leave it all to Ma Lu? Everyone was speechless, but Tong Yen was indifferent. Little Yi's pure nature is very rare. This is only a direction, and the possibility is actually very small. To break through the space barrier, the requirements for the size of the celestial body are very high. The bigger the object, the more difficult it is to pass through. If it's too big, it can't pass through. If it's too small, it can't pass through. Therefore, it's just filling in the gap, but not necessarily. Because of this, the plan changed again. According to the Elder's suggestion, groups of Supremes were ordered to be sent out. Knowing that this might be related to the survival of the domain, no one dared to be careless. Information transmission channels were quickly established. After all, it was only a distance of 100 years in the fifth ring domain. In fact, 4 cultivators, half-immortals, only needed a year. For other cultivators, it would not take more than 2 or 3 years. To them, it was not a long distance. There was also the negative space. A batch of the best negative space floating rafts were used to enter the negative space along the tracks and carefully search the space. When the huge fifth ring machine started to operate, everything seemed so orderly, and unhurried. Among the 4 people of the fifth ring, Yen Qing volunteered to participate in the search of the negative space. This was where her interest lay, and she did not want to force it. In her words, Xianyuan only needed one person to stay in the fifth ring, even if it was a useless person with nothing to do. He really was a useless person, because he did not care about anything. This was not Lu Xiaoyi pretending to be a big boss, but for this kind of decisive matter, 1 or 2 people were enough. The more people there were, the more ideas there would be. In the end, it would be a mess. With Qing Xian as the leader, and Shi assisting from the side, he would be the spiritual leader. This was actually the best way. What was a spiritual leader? It was only a name, occasionally cheering, and not doing anything practical. This was what he was good at. The 20,000-year celebration was still going on. The higher-ups of the fifth ring domain did not leave any loopholes in this aspect, and they were very happy with the demonstration and preaching of Tao. There was no abnormality at all. However, there were also naturally sharp guests who noticed that other than the half-immortals in the fifth ring domain, there seemed to be a lack of Supremes from the top forces. Of course, this gap was quickly filled by the other sects and forces in the fifth ring domain. Because there were not many people, there were no loopholes for the time being. The celebration continued like this. Slowly, there were people who left and people who came. The joy continued, especially for the middle and lower class cultivators. The changes in the universe were too far away from them, and they did not even have the right to know. Of course, if they knew, they would not be of any use other than adding to the chaos. During the celebration, the cultivators' management of the mortal world suddenly became strict. They announced to the outside world that there were evil people who took advantage of the celebration to fish in troubled waters and loot a burning house. Of course, this was a matter of course. This was the protection of the cultivation world for the mortal world. No one would think of other aspects. Chapter 2293. A year later, Qing Xian and Shishi found escort Lu hiding in one of the countless peaks in the dome. They threw the jade scroll in front of him without any hesitation or respect. "Lord Escort, this is the results of the search for the past year. Please take a look and give us some pointers." Lu Xiaoyi didn't mind at all. It was normal for people to be grumpy when they were working. You have to understand. You're here? You're here to report? You're very hard-working, worthy of recognition. Difficulties in your work? Difficulties are only temporary. You have to display your subjective initiative, face the difficulties head-on, be unyielding, and never give up. You didn't find anything? That's right. If it's that easy, what do you need us to do? Fellow Taoists, you have to deeply understand the responsibility on your shoulders. You have to shoulder the historical burden of revitalizing the fifth ring. You have to. Escort Lu chuckled when he saw two murderous gazes staring at him. Just a few words and you have to trouble me with the entire jade scroll. Don't blame me for being bureaucratic. Just say it. Do you want to expand the search area? Qing Xian suppressed his anger. This bastard was getting more and more out of hand. Was he ordering them around like donkeys? That's right, we didn't find anything of value. This was expected because the cultivators in charge of clearing the tracks were very clear about this area. There were no abnormalities. So we all think that we should expand the search area and search deeper and wider. So we need you to add more people. I hope your so-called bad news is true. Otherwise, let's see how you explain it to the fifth ring Taoists if we mobilize so many people. Lu Xiaoyi was shameless. What do I have to explain? Aren't you the one in charge? Seeing that the two were about to explode at any time, he returned to normal. Deepen and widen. I mean, we don't have to do it together. The number of people we need to add is not small. The fifth ring can feel it immediately. Just expand outwards and don't push forward. Anyway, there's no problem of running out of time. Let's figure out the problems in the 100-year track first before we talk about anything else. This was more like something a human would say. Indeed, with the track as the axis, expanding from one universe to 3 universes meant expanding the radius by 3 times. Thus, the space increased by more than 10 times. The sharp increase in manpower would not be able to hide it from the busybodies in the fifth ring. The two didn't say much and prepared to go back and start the implementation. In terms of action, Qing Xian had nothing to say, but he still left some harsh words before he left. I've marked all the special places on the jade slip. You'd better take a look. Everyone's perspective was different. Different people would see the same thing differently. In addition, every month from now on, I will make a copy of the astronomical situation from the universe for you. It's up to you whether you want to look at it or not. If you can't find it in the end, don't blame us for not trying our best. The two of them turned around and left. Behind them, Escort Lu was very dissatisfied. What's with your attitude, leaders? Do you think you can quit? Do you believe that I? After thinking for a long time, Lu Xiaoyi still could not think of anything to do with Lu Xiaoyi. He could only turn around and sigh. He picked up the jade-inscribed scroll. It was really worrisome, but he knew that he could not avoid it. There was one thing that Qing Xian saw clearly, and that was, Lu Xiaoyi's vision was always different from others. This wasn't entirely a problem of vision, but also the broadening of vision from mastering more Tao states. More importantly, a memory from before gave him a different way to think about problems. So, what others couldn't see, he might not be able to. Thus, his mind sank into the jade scroll. After a round of investigation, he was a little disappointed. He couldn't see anything either. They were all normal cosmic celestial phenomena. There was no abnormality at all. Regarding these celestial phenomena, the half-immortals who came personally had a detailed introduction, including the stability of the celestial phenomena. There was nothing special about it. There was also news from the negative space, and so on. It seemed that other than expanding the scope of investigation, there was nothing else to do. He could only continue to wait. The event was still not over. As the aftermath of the arrival of a large number of half-immortals was still fermenting, no one was willing to leave. They were still immersed in the excitement of Tao. There were even cultivators who heard the news and rushed over. A few years was nothing to the yuanying of a perfected cultivator. So, the event that was supposed to slowly fade was still bustling with people. Escort Lu's concept of happy cultivation ended up shooting himself in the foot. Finally, someone noticed that something was wrong, because a large number of perfected cultivators in the fifth ring mysteriously left, and then after a period of time, there was news that the fifth ring might be involved in a terrifying collision of celestial phenomena. Then, the news spread throughout the entire fifth ring, and even to the surrounding regions. Everyone was very depressed, even if they tried their best to guard against this, but even as strong as a cultivator, they could never control things like rumors. This was the bad habit of humans. If another deep-rooted bad habit was added to the mix, gossiping, a single spark could start a prairie fire. We can't shut them up. Moreover, too many of our people have left. The worst thing is that the next 100 years of the fifth ring's flight path are not that remote. On the contrary, it's a place where human cultivators are more active, with so many fifth ring cultivators loitering in the nearby airspace. It's inevitable that people will bump into them. With such a large number of fifth ring cultivators loitering in the nearby airspace, many regions will come over to ask if the fifth ring is going to restart the cultivation war. There's no way to explain it. Old man Chong Jin complained. They couldn't be blamed for not doing their best. It was impossible for them not to do their best. This concerned the safety of the region, and was a matter of great importance. To them, this was a more important and practical threat than the new era. But things like rumors could not be seen or touched. Even immortals could not do anything about it. You can't make everyone stay silent and not think about it, right? And cultivators were a group of people who were the quickest to think. Even the slightest movement could not be hidden from them. Qing Yangzi was also very helpless. This is still the more restrained when we're transferring people. There's not enough people outside. I was wondering if we should send some yuanying over? That way they won't be so conspicuous? Guandu went straight to the point. Don't be so secretive. Don't let people say that the fifth ring is petty. Let's do it big dafa. Let's do it openly and directly announce it. Our opponents are heavenly phenomenon cultivators, not humans. Can we change our strategy? This way, we can satisfy the manpower problem of the exploration team and also shut the mouths of those who spread rumors. As for the rest, mouths are on people's bodies. Let them be. The only thing we need to be strict about is to strengthen the control of the spread of the news in the mortal world. Let's not be shy. Just say that there might be a celestial body collision, but everything is under control. How messy can this kind of publicity be? They all nodded in agreement. In dealing with this matter, Guandu's straightforwardness was actually the best way. Chapter 2294. The fifth ring cultivators finally made their stance clear. Just as Guandu said, the rumors stopped. Sometimes, the more you try to hide something, the more curious people will be. When you explain the problem clearly, it is actually not a big deal. Which domain has not been hit by small meteors, planets or meteorites in the long river of time? It was normal. Following the confirmation of the news, a large number of fifth ring cultivators began to move out to investigate all the astronomical phenomena in the airspace around the track. Some cultivators even flew further, exceeding the limit of the three sides of the universe. They paid special attention to some of the famous unstable astronomical phenomena. No one doubted it, because this judgment was made by the god in their hearts. Escort Lu. You shouldn't have stood out? Qing Xian was very dissatisfied, because as a dog-headed military advisor, he had to protect this guy's reputation. If he made a wrong judgment, the glorious image that was built up with great difficulty would be stained. People would say, Escort Lu? He's good at fighting and killing, but he might not be able to lead an era, a trend. He can't even figure out the astronomical phenomena, let alone the trend of the new era in the future? When people reached a certain status, failure would become an unbearable pain. It didn't matter to the average person, but if you wanted to lead an era and play a pivotal role in the new era where the great Tao was changing, this was very rare and precious. How could the chosen one fail? Everyone understood this principle, especially Lu Xiaoyi's friends, so the real reason why they tolerated him being lazy was that they didn't want him to personally appear in front of the public to lead this matter, because there were too many variables in the collision of astronomical phenomena. This was a kind of packaging. Although there was no such thing in this cultivation world, in fact, many forces were doing this. No one was perfect. If there was a need, they could only package a perfect person. Especially for someone like Lu Xiaoyi, who was full of bad habits, his friends worked very hard to package him. Truth be told, from the moment he started to gather people to return to the fifth ring, the fact that the whole thing was his idea had already been revealed to everyone. However, he was still able to keep it under wrap. However, now that the real purpose of the half-immortals returning to the fifth ring was exposed, everyone was more inclined to believe that the whole thing was led by Escort Lu. Other than him, no one else had the ability to rally people. If it was something that was destined to show his face, his friends would certainly be happy to see it happen. But if it was something that might show his butt, they would definitely stop it. So far, her buttocks had not been exposed, but her waist had been exposed. The entire search was fruitless. He was slipping towards a false alarm. On the other hand, Escort Lu had publicly admitted that the entire search was based on his own judgment without the consent of his friends. This made Qing Xian and Shi very angry. Shi stared at him. Little E, could it be that you've already realized that we may never find that so-called dangerous astronomical phenomenon? Lu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed because he did not know how to answer. In the cultivation world of the universe, similar mistakes could be found everywhere in all aspects of cultivation. Even the cultivator's own cultivation often had inexplicable deviations. If humans were like this, then there was no need to talk about the natural astronomical phenomenon of the universe. False alarms, exaggerations, panic, and in the end they found out that it was a false alarm. Such astronomical errors were too common. For others, it was normal, but for a leader of the new era, it should not be. Especially when it caused such a huge impact. Dozens of half-immortals returned, and thousands of perfected cultivators went to investigate. However, there were also people who supported Lu Xiaoyi, such as his senior sister and Guan Du. On this point, the swordsman's attitude was surprisingly consistent. Yan Qing did not hesitate. What's there to hide? It was Little Yi's idea in the first place. It was his suspicion. If he guessed right, he could choose not to stand up. But if he guessed wrong, he must stand up. Xuanyuan's sword vein has never avoided his mistakes and has never changed. Qing Xian was speechless. These were two completely different categories, okay? One was for his personal sentiments, the other was for everyone's future. Forget it, there was no way to reach a consensus with the swordsman in this regard. The swordsman would be a qualified friend, but sometimes he was stubborn and did not know how to be flexible. This was the difference in ideals, the irreconcilable difference between individual heroism and team spirit. Lu Xiaoyi was puzzled. It's not worth arguing about such a small matter, right? The key is to continue the search. The results are not out yet, and you're worried about my reputation? This was the truth. Therefore, Qing Xian's choice was to increase the investment since they were already at this point. Open and aboveboard, brazen and bold. More cultivators were sent out, and the radius of the search expanded from the three-way universe to the five-way universe. What was worse was that many friends and guests also joined in, and gradually spread to the surrounding cultivation planets. To be able to make the fifth ring know such a big favor was more precious than anything else. In the following period of time, the fifth ring's matter was no longer their own matter, but the matter of all the cultivators in the surrounding space domain, and even the eastern elephant sky. Countless cultivators wandered around the fifth ring's orbit, and you asked them what they were looking for? Actually, they themselves did not know. Were they looking for a celestial phenomenon that might affect the great fifth ring? A stumbling block that might hinder the fifth ring's movement? If they wanted to completely eliminate the hidden danger, then the best way was to eliminate all the celestial bodies in the fifth ring's orbit. It did not matter if there were people or not. It was best to eliminate all the celestial bodies in the universe, only then would they be absolutely safe. Things were starting to change. Someone was manipulating public opinion. They described the fifth ring as an arrogant domain that did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Although no one said it out loud, as time passed, all kinds of dissatisfaction, disdain, and shame began to slowly grow. Countless pieces of information about the universe's celestial phenomena flooded in, and Qing Xian and Shi were so busy that even Yan Cheng had to join in to help them analyze every possibility. This was originally a private matter of the fifth ring people, but now it had stirred up a storm in the universe. This was something they did not expect. The unpredictability of the human heart could be seen from this. It was meaningless to stop it now. The only counterattack was to find that celestial phenomenon and speak with facts. The current situation was no longer just a matter of Escort Lu's face, but also the entire fifth ring's face. Was it a pragmatic domain? Or was it a domain that did not live up to its name and thought it was infallible? A celestial body that did not know its own surname because of its powerful strength? Based on the current situation, the situation was not optimistic. The people of the fifth ring dug a hole for themselves during the 10,000-year celebration and then jumped into it, and now they were filling in the soil themselves. They were about to become the biggest joke of the universe before the new era. Chapter 2295. What was Escort Lu doing? He was playing chess and chatting with Qin Yangzi and Chang Jin. The wisdom of an old man was a priceless asset. Lifespan was not the only thing that mattered here. Those half-immortals who had lived for tens of thousands of years were actually more focused on cultivation in the inner and outer scenic heavens, but their time in the mortal world was far less than these old young gods who had lived for 5,000 years. They were the ones who had been in life and cultivation all their lives. Lu Xiaoyi did not need anyone to teach him in cultivation, and no one could guide him. On the contrary, he gained a lot from interacting with these old young gods. It was an attitude that had been settled over the years. Qin Yangzi put down a piece and said with a smile, "That's how it is." At the beginning, it seemed very simple, but as time passed and the process developed, all kinds of strange things began to appear. You can't say that this is man-made, deliberate. But you have to admit that surrounding you, surrounding the sword vein, and surrounding the fifth ring is still that kind of deep malice. It has never changed. No matter what height you reach in the future, it will not disappear. This is the cultivation world. Chang Jin interrupted, "Unless you fall, can't recover from a setback. Return to being ordinary. There will be no more highlight of the past. Because you will no longer be a threat to others and become an insignificant figure, then the malice surrounding you will naturally turn into kindness. Maybe it will even help you when you are in danger. Therefore, You have no way to deal with this power. It exists in the depths of human thought. Whether it is malice or kindness, they are actually the same group of people. Amazing, right? Guan Du snorted, saying so much is actually just hypocrisy? They can't see others better than themselves, so they will definitely do all kinds of things behind your back. When you are worse than them, then you will satisfy their cheap desire to be good. The hunter will shoot the bird that sticks out. This is human nature. It has nothing to do with anything else. If you want to take this step, this is what you have to bear. You can't avoid it. Lu Xiaoyi was very serious. Actually, I don't care. Even if I am condemned by everyone. Qin Yangzi snorted, we care. Because you no longer represent just one person. You represent Xianyuan. You represent the sword vein. Now, it represented 5 rings. In the future, it might even represent a new power. I know you don't care. But you're no longer who you used to be. Chang Jin smiled. Packaging. This was a must. Not for anything else, but to establish a path in the land of the Yellow Dragon in the future. Do you think this is all about the profoundness and miraculousness of the Great Tao? That's right, that's also wrong. The concept of the Great Tao itself was the cornerstone. This was needless to say. But to build a building, there were a lot of cornerstones. If not a single cornerstone was unique, then why were there so many innate Taos? Could it only be the day after tomorrow? The quality of one's own great Tao was the prerequisite. Whether or not one could rise to the top would depend on publicity. He had to form a force. With the general trend sweeping through, everyone agrees and agrees. This is also the key to establishing the Tao. Qin Yangzi continued, the cultivation environment is developing and changing, it's not static. The reason why the 36 innate Taos were called innate Taos was because they represented nature. At that time, the cultivation world of the universe was far from that. There were only a few big cats and small cats. If you could comprehend a great Tao and fit it with nature, then you would have succeeded. It was the environment at that time that made it so. Of course. Is the environment now the same as the ancient times? Cultivators have long occupied half of the world. This kind of reality will definitely be reflected in the new era. So now, nature and cultivators are equal. Chang Jin stroked his long beard. Equal means that there is the possibility of humans participating in the control. The universe is so big. No one can completely control the trend, not even immortals. But you have to admit that cultivators' hobbies, biases, and thoughts can actually be controlled. Even human cultivators are not as independent as you think. Many times, trends can often decide their thoughts. If there was such a list in the universe that could make everyone think that such a list could represent the trend of the current era, then even if the great Tao at the top was a pile of shit, it would still have countless followers. Qin Yangzi chuckled. So, the problem comes to the problem of how to control the list. This is the power of publicity. Countless methods, overt and covert, crooked and evil, real and fake, exaggerating, elevating oneself and belittling others, etc., are actually all for this purpose. The universe's cultivation world doesn't have such a list, but there are variations of it. That is the Tao monument in the land of the Yellow Dragon. You are not afraid of being criticized by everyone, but your great Tao is. If everyone rejects your great Tao, then why would the new era choose it as the foundation? There are many other choices. Chang Jin sighed. Nature takes up half, and cultivators take up the other half. The simplest way is to choose the great Tao that is compatible with nature, because they will definitely continue. For example, time, space, the 5 elements, yin and yang, etc. No one can affect these things on the list, but it also means huge competition. But the new great Tao of cultivators is not like this. Other than the quality of the great Tao itself, it also contains many other things. This is the reason why we must package you. You have a strong foundation. If you can be recognized by the majority of cultivators in the universe, it is natural for you to rise. So, from now on, you can't make mistakes. You have to hold yourself to the standard of a saint. You also have to reach the standard of a saint. Lu Xiaoyi was stunned. The two old guys used their vulgar eyes to show him the other side of the great Tao that no one knew. But I am really not a saint. If I have to choose, there are 10,000 or even 1,000,000 people in front of me. Qing Yangzi smiled slyly. Of course you are not a saint. There are no saints in this world, not in the past, not now, and not after the new era. So, this is the value of what we are doing. Saints are not made, they are packaged. Tailored for you, all kinds of propaganda, bragging, exaggerating, about how unparalleled your battle strength is, how Immortal Peng subverts ethics, how Escort Lu stands up for you. Don't be embarrassed. Only when you feel that the image created by the propaganda is you, and naturally replace it with your own body, can you be considered a qualified saint, a great founder of the Tao. Lu Xiaoyi stammered. But, is packaging so easy? Just like this. Chang Jin laughed loudly. This is not a problem. Of course, for the safety of the fifth ring, we will do our best to find it. Spare no effort. But if we really can't find it, then we will create one. Is it very difficult? Chapter 2296. Escort Lu was completely defeated by these two shameless old fellows. You have to admit that what they said was very reasonable. In fact, Lu Xiaoyi had been doing this all along, intentionally or unintentionally. For example, he had established his own circle of power in the inner and outer scenic skies, in the various large domains, and in the Kuan Dao meeting. However, he did this purely based on his instincts, unlike the two old fellows who were straightforward, systematic, and organized. Qing Yangzi chuckled. Don't think that we are harming you or have ulterior motive. If we want to establish ourselves in the new era, the 5 rings must choose such a representative. Tell me, can we choose anyone else? Qing Xian and Shi Shi, they are always lacking a little bit. Under real pressure, they can't withstand it. If we really meet an existence like Xianpeng, I don't dare to imagine the consequences, but it definitely won't be as beautiful as you. You carry the hope of the entire 5 rings. As the saying goes, when a man achieves the Tao, even his chickens and dogs will ascend to the heavens. If you succeed, the 5 rings will fly with you. Everyone will have the best start in the new era. If you fail, then everyone will have to prepare for a hard life. When the time comes, new and old debts will be settled together. Since Li Wuya's era, do you think it will be good? Chang Jin smiled. Of course, Xiaoyi, you don't have to feel any pressure. Do what you need to do. You just need to cooperate with us when necessary. You have to be clear that at this point you are no longer you. Qing Xian and Shi Shi will take over this task in the coming days. Whether we old fellows are still around or not, this is a fixed plan and will not change. Lu Xiaoyi was a little confused. After returning to his snowy peak, he began to think about the two old fellows' rotten idea. In fact, it was not a bad idea. For things like this, if you don't do it, others will do it anyway. You will suffer for no reason. Just like this incident, it was just a private matter of the 5 rings that did not involve other domains, but it was still pushed behind the scenes and maliciously slandered. It was this kind of mentality that caused mischief. The battle in the dark had begun long ago. It did not stop at the battle, but also at the creation of public opinion, propaganda, and slandering others. This grand meeting had allowed him to see many of the dark sides of the Tao. He finally understood that if the great Tao was no longer purely determined by nature, but also involved the participation of true cultivators like humans, then it would be impossible to avoid such filth. It also gave him a new understanding of the new era. Yes, the current universe was no longer a completely natural universe. Instead, it was a universe shared by nature and living beings. Nature was still indestructible, but living beings also possessed the ability to change certain aspects. The conservative power might represent the eternal and unchanging nature. The emerging power represented the power of living beings participating in the management of the universe. Since the power of living beings participated in the establishment of the Great Tao, it was impossible to avoid the dark side. This was also a major characteristic of living beings. In fact, it was also a part of the Great Tao, who said that the Great Tao had to be bright and just. Light and darkness are eternal opposites. As long as light can maintain the dominant position in this cultivation world, it will be fine. This was probably the intention of the heavenly Tao to start a new era, right? The system of the past was indeed not very suitable for the rapid changes in the universe, especially after the cultivation creatures showed more and more power. What should he do? Was it still the same old me? Or go with the flow? This was a question, but he could not get the answer for the time being. The Great Tao was no longer pure. But now what struck him was, should the Great Tao be pure? Were the few Great Tao that Lu Xiaoyi prepared completely pure? The mysteries of the universe that originated from nature and returned to nature? Did he not smuggle any personal goods? Did he not want to overturn the true cultivator's order? Others were the same, including Li Wuya. Everyone was smuggling their own goods. This was human nature. No one was innocent. They established their Tao purely for the sake of the Great Tao. Then, did he smuggle personal goods for himself? That did not seem to be the case. The new Great Tao that he created did not have any inclination towards himself, nor did it lean towards the sword vein or the 5 rings. He established the Great Tao not for himself, not for Li Wuya, and not for the sword vein. It was for change. A brand new Great Tao that could be naturally metabolized. It should be a survival of the fittest that could circulate the entire true cultivation world's system. Not a ripple in stagnant water. If this was considered personal goods, then why not just smuggle them? If this process was not so open and aboveboard, and there were also people who were unscrupulous, why not? After all, he was not a saint. This was the core of the matter. After thinking it through, he felt much more relaxed mentally. In fact, in the process of a cultivator's growth and establishment of their Tao, it was filled with constant doubts, corrections, negations, and conflicts of ideas. It was not about whether one's ideas were correct, but whether one could truly convince oneself. How could one be completely correct? You might think it was correct, but others might not. Cultivation was the cultivation of the heart. Correct your heart and you would be the Great Tao. On this trip home, he had a further understanding of the Great Tao. It was no longer the mentality of pursuing perfection and purity. Instead, it had become more realistic and practical. In fact, wasn't the so-called new era a change that had to be made because of the rise of the true cultivation world? Establishing one's own Great Tao and then leaving it to time and the vast number of cultivators to test and practice. If it was wrong, then it would be changed and a more suitable one would be chosen. Wasn't this the true meaning of why he chose to devour the heavenly tribulation and the Great Tao of reincarnation? Establishing a self-perfecting system and self-correcting order would allow the universe's true cultivation world to go further and better through constant adjustments. He felt that this was his greatest contribution to the new era. Once again, he consolidated his confidence in the creation of a new Great Tao. He felt that his heart was much clearer. Many things that he did not understand before were now clear to him. As for trivial matters like packaging, why should he care too much about it? He was not obsessed with cleanliness of Great Tao. His Tao heart was like a piece of red-hot thick iron. It was constantly hammering through various events and various ideas. This was the process that one had to go through to become a useful steel embryo. Lu Xiaoyi had been hammering all kinds of things. It was not only on the profound theories, but also the meaning of the existence of great Tao and its help to the new world. He had finally hammered out the last of his impurities and indecisiveness. He felt that he could now go to the land of the Yellow Dragon and set up a Tao tablet. But now, he still had to solve the problem of the fifth ring. Even though his Tao heart was clearer, that sense of danger did not disappear. Instead, it became clearer. Thus he knew that all of this was not unfounded. Chapter 2297. Correcting his attitude would help him better analyze the astronomical news that came like raindrop. There were too many. You could never imagine how many astronomical stars there were around a 100-year-old track. If the radius was limited to one side of the universe, it could barely be counted. If it was magnified to 3 sides of the universe, it would be an astronomical number. Qing Xian and the others had no choice but to hand over the preliminary screening to the cultivators in the field. This was an essential step. Otherwise, not to mention the few of them, even if there were dozens or hundreds of people, they wouldn't be able to study the nature of these astronomical phenomena. Was it stable? Moving direction? Was there a possibility of changing direction? Would it collapse? Could the track of the next 100 years coincide with the track of the fifth ring? The only thing that was most feasible was that he didn't need to consider celestial bodies that were below a certain size, because this could be a matter of a great cultivator's fist and sword. They were too busy. This is harder than finding a needle in a haystack. I thought it would be a simple thing to find a celestial body that was about to crash into the track of the fifth ring, but I didn't expect that if all the factors were considered, it would be possible for all the celestial bodies to crash in? She laughed. This is the universe, everything is possible. And most of them are actually impossible. If we want to find that sliver of possibility, we have no other way but to use human wave tactics. Qing Xian shook his head. Although the recent busyness didn't make him overworked, he was still in low spirits because he couldn't see any hope. Should we change our way of thinking? Should we shift our focus from finding out where the danger is to simply wait for the rabbit to appear? Should we just wait here quietly? Our ability to destroy stars has a limit. How many celestial bodies can a half-immortal destroy? What about dozens of half-immortals? What if we add all the fifth ring supremes? Calculate the lowest destruction limit, then we can use it as a standard to mark the celestial bodies that are larger than this limit. This will definitely be a small number, then send people to monitor it at all times. Establish a communication channel and report it immediately. If there are any strange movements, gather people to destroy it. Shishi's eyes lit up. That's a good idea. No matter what astronomical phenomenon it is, as long as it's big enough to threaten the fifth ring, then it definitely won't be small. If such a big thing moves, it will take a certain amount of time. It will take at least a few years, enough for us to gather people to deal with it. In the void of the universe, the dangers of nature would not suddenly appear. There had to be a process, and there had to be a sign. It wasn't as if he was releasing a flying sword, where he could see it before he could see it. If that's the case, we won't have to stay in this sea of people. The rumors outside were getting more and more widespread, more and more ridiculous. It's irrational to maintain such a scale for a long time. Qing Xian made up her mind, let's do that. But before that, since he had already sent out so many people, he might as well let them do a thorough job and mark out all the dangerous celestial bodies. I estimate that it will take another 10 years to achieve this goal, which is not an unacceptable time for us. The two of them looked at Lu Xiaoyi, and he could only nod gently. In theory, this was a good idea. They didn't have to wait here, and they could deal with any danger at any time. However, there was one thing he couldn't say, and that was, What if the danger didn't appear in the form of a collision? Qing Xian and Qing Xian went to make arrangements. It had been 5 years since they started to search for the tracks. If they had another 10 years, then 15 years was not a big problem for half-immortals and Yuanying. However, Lu Xiaoyi had to consider that he couldn't tie everyone up here because of a completely baseless guess. If there was real evidence, even if it was 100 or 1,000 years, it would be worth it for his hometown. However, if it was just a guess, then the dangers of the void of the universe would never stop. After one collision, the next collision would start, and it would never end. Would everyone never leave the fifth ring? Just to wait for that collision that didn't exist? This was the most rational decision. Everyone was very busy. The half-immortals were anxious to set up a monument, and the Supremes were grasping the last chance to take another step forward. What was the point of dragging everyone here? If this logic was true, then all the cultivators in the universe shouldn't come out, and just wait for the possible collision of their celestial bodies. It was groundless worry. He could persist. However, he could only persist by himself. He couldn't drag the whole world with him. Dozens of half-immortals, thousands of Supremes, and countless Yuanying. That was not the way of cultivators. People would say, "Look, the people of the fifth ring are really gutsy. They don't dare to go out because they are afraid of a collision between worlds." He had to admit that those rumors and slanders still had an impact on him. It was a real impact that made him unable to do as he wished. As time passed, the information finally became concise. Small celestial bodies and small celestial bodies were all ignored. This kind of screening immediately reduced the number of celestial bodies from 7 digits to 4 digits. The cultivators who went out to investigate only reported 2 possibilities. One was that they thought there was a real danger, and the other was that the celestial bodies were big enough to threaten the fifth ring. The fifth ring's 2000th anniversary celebration was gradually coming to an end. There were fewer and fewer people at the conference, and some guests also began to leave. However, the majority of the people still stayed. In the end, 100 years was nothing to a great cultivator. Even if it was Yuanying, 100 years to them was like a few years to mortals. Was it too much for mortals to go to a city to study for a few years? It was just a stop in their lives. The rumors also became more and more unbearable. Everyone was guessing what the fifth ring was looking for. Conspiracy theories began to spread. Many people thought that the fifth ring was just using this as an excuse and had other motives. Dominate the eastern heavens? Start another cosmic war? Destroy Buddhism and spread the Tao? Unify the universe? There were various versions and countless plans. The more they spread, the more ridiculous they became. One could not help but admire the imagination of these people. They basically covered all the dark sides of humanity. However, the fifth ring itself was unmoved. Cultivators were still sent out, and the news was sent back one after another. In the process, many groups of space pirates were eliminated, and several groups of wandering insects were killed. The public security around the tracks was completely restored. No one closed their doors at night, and no one picked up lost items on the road. This was also a bonus, but it was a bit like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. Lu Xiaoyi stayed at the fifth ring and did not move. He had also thought about whether he should personally go there. However, he quickly dismissed this idea. Because even with his speed, it would take him at least a few decades to go through all the important celestial bodies. Because if you want to go and see them, you have to see them all. How can you choose which to see and which not to see? Therefore, you can only trust others. This was also the mentality of a person in a high position, a person who wanted to do great things, must have, to control the overall situation, and not do everything personally. You will die of exhaustion. Moreover, the people below you will not appreciate your kindness. Chapter 2298. Another 9 years passed. One day, Qing Xian sent a message. Found it? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He knew that this would be the case. He would definitely find it. It was just packaging. Is it arranged? Do you need me to go over and show my face? Is there a ribbon-cutting ceremony? Is there a dung thread meet and greet? Do you want to gather paparazzi from all over the world? Qing Xian was very serious. Be serious. This is to eliminate a hidden danger for the fifth ring. It's a very serious matter. If we don't believe it ourselves, how can we expect others to believe it? Of course you have to show your face. Dress more formally. It's best if you wear a tall hat. We'll set off tomorrow. We still need you to give us a speech. The message was sent over. It was a huge planet. There were countless galaxies in the universe. The basic characteristic was that they needed a star to provide the light source. Then, various planets would orbit around the star, either far or near, to obtain energy from the star and provide nutrients for life. This was a nameless planet in a nameless galaxy. It had no atmosphere and no spiritual vigor. Of course, there were no life forms. It was the outermost planet in the galaxy. Because of its huge size, it was not much different from the star. Therefore, its orbit was farther and farther away. It had been close to the star in ancient times. After a few million years, it had almost broken free from the star's gravitational force and became a free planet. Usually, at this time, cultivators would give it a name. This planet was outside the 2 universes away from the fifth ring's orbit. It was supposed to be in a situation where they did not interfere with each other. The orbit was so far apart that it was impossible for them to cross paths. However, there were many talented cultivators in the fifth ring. There was a powerful person who calculated that when the fifth ring passed by this galaxy, its powerful gravitational force field would destroy the galaxy's fragile gravitational balance system. Its influence on the other small planets was limited, but it would have a fundamental impact on the outermost planet. It was like adding the last straw to a camel. The result was that this planet would completely break free from the star's shackles and be thrown out. It would be thrown in the direction of the fifth ring. This was because it broke free under the gravitational force of the fifth ring. In other words, a collision was inevitable. It wasn't a coincidence, but the uncanny workmanship of nature. It could be imagined that when an incomparably huge planet, although smaller than the 5 rings, was moving in a circle, it would be like dancing with a metal ball tied to a rope. The rope would suddenly snap, and the metal ball would be flung out at an astonishing speed. In Lu Xiaoyi's other memory, there was an expert who speculated about the extinction of life on the mother planet. The result was that an asteroid crashed into the mother planet, causing a disaster of the century. The Ice Age, the extinction of large animals, and the impact created an ocean. It took the mother planet 60 to 70 million years to recover from such a consequence. This time, the planet was not an asteroid, but a supermassive planet. If they really collided, not to mention the new era, even 10 new eras would not be able to recover. Perhaps the fifth ring would disintegrate? Such a large body was not something that could be destroyed by humans. Lu Xiaoyi found Qing Xian and asked curiously, "Ma Lu, how did you guys find this?" "Very professional. This is not just passing off the fake as the real, it's passing off the real as the real. Speaking of which, according to your research, will this thing really produce the effect you said? If not, how can you prove that this thing will definitely break free? There are many experts among the paparazzi, ordinary words can't fool them." Qing Xian looked at him and said seriously, "This is not an act. It's real. We did say that if we can't find such a hidden danger, we will arrange for one. But this doesn't mean that we can't find it. Everything about this planet is real, and it was warned by our friends from other worlds. According to them, the position of this planet has always been changing, and it is getting further and further away from the star. That's why they determined that the planet will eventually break free, but the time and conditions for it to break free cannot be determined. When the fifth ring passes by, it will definitely change the gravitational field of the surrounding space. This is also a fact. We are just not sure if this kind of quantitative change can really cause a qualitative change. But you have to admit that it is a hidden danger, right? We can't wait until the fifth ring gets close to it before we try our luck, right? So whether it's real or not, we will treat it as real. This is the principle. The safety of the fifth ring is the most important thing, so we'll just do whatever we want. A friend warned him? A legendary friend? Why did these words sound so familiar? Without seeing it personally, he had no right to speak. Lu Xiaoyi decided to talk about it when he got there. Now that things had developed to this point, he found that things were getting more and more out of his control. It was as if he had become an outsider, being pushed around by a group of people. He didn't like this feeling, but he also knew that he couldn't refuse such good intentions. As a member of this cultivation world, he had to adapt to certain things, and not ignore them just because he didn't like them. Qing Yangzi was right about one thing: in certain situations, he was no longer himself. He couldn't abandon everyone's efforts just because of himself, but what he could do was to appear in such situations as less as possible. The fifth ring sent out a huge team for this operation. On one hand, it was necessary, and on the other hand, it was a show for others to see. Of course, there were countless cultivators from other regions who followed Feng Jing. They were the witnesses, proving that the fifth ring people worked together as one, proving that Escort Lu had great foresight and was an indispensable mouthpiece. Escort Lu's reputation still depended on these busybodies who didn't know the inside story to spread it everywhere. After Lu Xiaoyi's simple speech, the huge team set off. His speech was a bit dry, and he couldn't fake his usual enthusiasm. It wasn't his intention to fake it, so where did the enthusiasm come from? No one blamed him, but word spread among the team that Escort Lu was modest, low-key, pragmatic, and not boastful. In short, being high-profile had its benefits, and being low-key had its benefits. As long as you wanted to praise someone, you could always find an entry point, even if you were actually a pile of shit. Not only the cultivators from the fifth ring, but also the cultivators who had been busy in the void of the universe for more than 10 years. Everyone had worked hard, and now it was finally time to reap the fruits of their labor. At the very least, after this time, they wouldn't have to run around the universe like headless flies looking for something. Although the cultivators didn't care about this little bit of time, and although the fifth ring was their hometown and they couldn't overemphasize it, searching aimlessly still felt like a waste of time. Even if there was an opponent they could have a good fight with, everyone felt relaxed. Chapter 2299. A year later, Lu Xiaoyi finally saw the so-called culprit 2 universes away from the fifth ring's track 50 years away. The reason it had become the target of public criticism was thanks to Guardian Lu. Otherwise, how could a desolate planet with no special characteristics, no special products, and no humans, which had countless such existences in the universe, without even a name, appear in front of so many cultivators? Planet Dujiao. That's the new name we gave it, she said. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. The name is not bad. It's impactful and has a violent aesthetic feeling. What I mean is there a need to give such a nice name to a planet that is destined to be destroyed by you? Qing Xian was expressionless. There's no need. It's purely taking off one's pants. But if we consider the future propaganda, if the planet's name is more powerful, wouldn't it make the hero more powerful? If we name it Planet Mouse, wouldn't you become the hero who beats mice? Wouldn't it sound better? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. His 3 friends chuckled at the side. Propaganda was everywhere. Only they could think of that. So he said weakly, since we're already here, what should we do? I'm sure you already have a plan? I'm actually just a puppet. I'll listen to whatever you say. I promise I'll be obedient and not do anything funny. He understood that there was no other way to get rid of the packaging awkwardness. The most important thing was to quickly finish the job and leave. Qing Xian explained to him, to perfectly deal with this thing, there are two possible ways. The first is, we'll help it now and let planet Dujiao be thrown out in advance. Since it's not due to the gravitational force of the fifth ring, of course it won't fly to the fifth ring. As for where it will fly to, we'll see after we throw it out. Lu Xiaoyi nodded, good idea. But since you only said the first one, according to Ma Lu's character, you'll definitely not choose it. Why don't you just say the second real implementation method? Is guessing fun? Qing Xian turned a deaf ear to his sarcasm. No. You're only half right. This is actually the opinion of the fifth ring officials. It saved time and effort, and it was the best way to show a cultivator's control over the cosmic phenomena. But then you would stand up and oppose it, because if he did that, he wouldn't know where planet Dujiao would fly to. There were many cultivation realms nearby. No matter which one it was, it would be a disaster. Therefore, Escort Lu, who had the heart to save the world, would resolutely oppose it. Thus, we could only choose the second option, which was to break the bucket into several pieces and let them be slowly drawn back by the star due to their reduced size. This way, the myriad worlds will be safe and the universe will be harmonious. Escort Lu's reputation will definitely rise to another level. Everyone thought that this was a good idea, whether it was the people of the fifth ring or the large group of idlers who came to watch the show. This was not a battlefield, it was the most suitable place to watch a show. Only Escort Lu objected. His reason was righteous and stood on the moral high ground. At first glance, one could tell that he was a merciful person who would go to hell if he didn't. Oh, it was the other way around, it was me. In fact, if one thought about it carefully, this proposal was a bit pretentious. Planet Dujiao moved in a circle to help it escape the gravitational force of the stars. Because of its size, it was really difficult to control the direction. This kind of thing could only depend on luck. However, with the vastness of the universe, the stars only occupied a very small part of the space after all. Therefore, there was a high probability that after the planet flew out, it wouldn't collide with any human domain. At most, it would encounter some meteorites and meteors everywhere. In the end, it would be captured by the next strong gravitational force and then continue to be its planet, continuing its circular motion. But what Escort Lu pursued was not a high probability, but an absolute probability. This was a kind of responsibility towards life, it was a kind of noble state of cultivation. It was an act of kindness based on an attitude of incomparable respect for all forms of life. Everyone hoped that the future ruler would be a kind person. Even if it was hypocritical, it was still good, right? Chapter 2300. Because of Guard Lu's insistence, there were many hypocrites among the cultivators. When everyone finally decided to follow Guard Lu's method to deal with Planet Dujiao, the crowd cheered. It was as if justice had finally defeated evil, kindness had overpowered cruelty. Most of the people were here to watch the show. They were proud as if they had saved a planet. When you let the paparazzi in the universe participate, they were the best and most responsible propagandists in the universe, and they did it for free. Because after they were done promoting Escort Lu, they could proudly mention that they were also on Escort Lu's side at that time. Although it was Qing Xian's first time doing packaging, she had a deep understanding of it and there was a lot of potential to be discovered. The specific operation was secondary. Facing a planet that did not know how to fight back, there were dozens of demi-immortals, thousands of perfected cultivators, and almost 10,000 Yuanying, There was a lot of time and no one would disturb them. It was just a matter of time. A few months later, amidst the cheers of the crowd, planet Dujiao was split into 3 pieces. With such a size, it was difficult to make them fly away from the gravitational force of the stars. Even if the 5th ring passed by, it would not be able to pull away the centripetal force given by nature. The problem was solved? It seemed to be solved. Qing Xian explained, although the danger of planet Dujiao has passed, there is no smoke without fire. It is nearing the end of the era and the universe is in chaos. Not only humans but also celestial phenomena. Therefore, we still have to pay attention to what we need to pay attention to. The daily patrol of the 5th ring cannot be stopped. We have to increase the manpower and expand the area. However, the search this time has come to an end. There is no need to be paranoid and scare ourselves. What he said was the judgment of the demi-immortals. Cultivators could have intuition, but they could not be restricted by it. They should trust their own judgment and knowledge. For example, after nearly 15 years of tracking, they had completely figured out the distribution of large-scale celestial phenomena around the track. It was impossible for a celestial phenomenon to suddenly go crazy and crash into the 5th ring. Celestial phenomena were not humans. They would not be swayed by their emotions. They would only follow the laws of nature and would not change for millions of years. Therefore, they could be followed and could be predicted. Most importantly, it was impossible to maintain such surveillance and mobilize a large number of people to put their energy on unnecessary fears despite the end of the era. Therefore, this was the best way out. There were already some half-immortals who noticed that something was wrong, but no one was stupid enough to say it out loud. This was Escort Lu's face, as well as the entire 5th ring's face. However, just in case, the 5½ ring immortal stage experts still left a way to contact each other in case of real danger. In everyone's opinion, there would be a process to the collision. From the eruption of the celestial phenomenon, to the activation of the celestial phenomenon, to the acceleration, to the crossing of a long distance, there would always be some time to react. It's not like a flower pot fell from upstairs. After being together for more than 10 years, there was bound to be a time for them to part. Right in the sky, everyone reluctantly said their goodbyes. Everyone knew that this might be the last time they saw each other before the new era. When they met again, things would no longer be there, and it would only increase their sadness. Cultivators were a group of people who were the most willing to let go. They didn't have any excessive reluctance to leave. In the blink of an eye, they all returned to their respective places. Before the epoch, he had to make good use of his time. The only group of half-immortals who didn't leave was the 5½ ring group. Qing Xian looked at Lu Xiaoyi with a face of disgust. If there is no personal matter, everyone wants to go to the land of the Yellow Dragon and observe the newly erected Tao tablet. But before that, we need you to tell us the truth. According to the information you received and your intuition, has the danger of the 5½ ring been eliminated? Lu Xiaoyi smiled mischievously. I have always been honest. The information was provided by a friend I just met. It was very vague. He said that it would be within 100 years, so I can't tell whether he was referring to Planet Duel or not. My intuition tells me that the sense of crisis hasn't disappeared. He changed his tone. Previously, I thought about it too simply. In the end, I almost turned the elimination of the hidden danger into a big mistake in the universe. Now, it seems that this kind of problem that involves the collision of realms and celestial bodies is actually very common in all the realms of the universe. Any realm can encounter it at any time. It's a natural threat that can't be deliberately prevented. Especially setting up a large number of people to patrol and protect it is both unrealistic and clumsy. It's not the way of cultivation. Your idea of strengthening the patrols is enough. You don't need to affect other people's cultivation. Looking at his friends, he said sincerely, I remember that I told you before that I want to return to the 5½ ring for a while to cultivate my mind. This is not hypocritical politeness. It's my true thoughts. Because the time I stayed in the sect is too short, some things are too precious. So, since I have the intention to stay in the 5½ ring, and I happen to have some doubts about the outer space threat, why don't I just set 100 years as the limit to guard the 5½ ring? I can also calm my mind and think about some things that are not very smooth on the path of cultivation. It's killing two birds with one stone. With me here, I think you will feel at ease, right? Go to the land of the yellow dragon and cause trouble. I will guard the way out for you. But I need to say this in advance. If something happens, don't think about hiding away. I don't care what you are doing, you have to die back here. This was the good thing about getting along with these friends. They said whatever was on their minds and were not pretentious. If I could do it myself or needed help, I would never hide it. In the end, it would cause everyone to guess at each other. It was a waste of time and also a waste of affection. The basic premise was that the activation of the astronomical phenomenon required time. It was not an instant but several months. Therefore, there was enough time to react. No matter where they were, after receiving the news, it would not take too long for them to rush over through the projection of the inner and outer sceneries. There was no need for everyone to stay in one place. When Lu Xiaoyi insisted, the other three also understood that there must be a reason. However, cultivation was still cultivation. Rationalizing time was also a part of cultivation. They understood each other's intentions. She said, Dafa, that's good too. I will make a 5 hairs talisman for you. If you urgently need the 5 ring, just burn it. I will immediately know that something happened to the 5 ring. If you come back from the land of the yellow dragon, it will probably take less than a month. There is enough time. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. 5 hairs talisman? What is that? She was very proud. 5 hairs talisman refers to taking 5 hairs from my body to form a formation. When you burn it, I will immediately feel hot and itchy all over. The 5 hairs are the hair on my head, armpit, chest and legs. I can't say the hair. Lu Xiaoyi was not disgusted because he was an extremely disgusting person. He only looked at the other person expectantly. Senior sister, can you also refine a 5 hairs talisman for me? I will always keep it in my heart and feel each other's warmth. Yan Chun kicked him. I don't have chest hair. Chapter 23:01. Everyone came to an agreement. Shi and Yan Chang were impatient, so they immediately set off for the land of Yellow Dragon. Setting up a Tao tablet had an irresistible attraction to all cultivators. Not only did they set it up, but they also observed the great Tao of other sections. According to the exterior half-immortals who had already been to the land of Yellow Dragon, the land of Yellow Dragon was already very lively. There were no less than 10,000 cultivators gathered there, and the number was still increasing. Among them, there were only a few who had the confidence to set up a tablet. Most of them wanted to take a look first, but when they saw other people's Tao tablets, they couldn't help but give up on the idea of fishing in troubled waters. In the land of Yellow Dragon, there were no restrictions on setting up a Tao tablet. If you wanted to set it up, you could set it up. However, if your thing was too childish and superficial, then it would be useless other than being scolded and destroyed your confidence. Therefore, even if there were no restrictions, the Tao tablets that had already been set up were some benchmarks. You couldn't be too lacking, right? Most of these people didn't want to leave after they came. They were prepared to wait in the land of Yellow Dragon until the new era arrived. Time wasn't a problem for these cultivators. No one would miss such a rare opportunity. News from afar said that when the era changed, there would be countless great Taos colliding. In the end, dozens of great Taos would be decided. Such a grand occasion only happened once every few million years. Not to mention participating, Just being able to take a look at the scene was a blessing cultivated by the previous life. This kind of thinking was a consensus, so more and more people would gather. When the era changed, it was hard to say how many people would gather. Who would be able to stay out of it and sit in the Immortals' Cave? Presumably, those who could fly in the four symbols of the universe would all come, right? In these few thousand years, there were even some who died on the way or died of old age in the land of Yellow Dragon. They were like moths to a flame, with no regrets. Those who went now were mostly half-immortals, because they could still endure a few thousand years. As the great Tao fragments continued to collapse, the cultivators estimated that there would be perfected lords flying here. When the last few great Taos collapsed, the Yuanying would probably set off as well. How spectacular would that be? Since the beginning of the cultivation world, there had never been a true cultivation grand meeting of the universe. This was because there was no notice, no reason, and no motivation. The four celestial domains each did what they wanted. The gathering of a few domains was already a very impressive grand meeting, just like the five-ring heaven's birthday this time. However, the grand event of the five rings heavens this time around was also insignificant on the cosmic level. It was not even 10% of the eastern elephant heavens, so how could it be considered grand? This was the first time since he started cultivating. One could imagine that this would be the only time before the next era changed. There was no need for invitations, urges, temptations, rewards. There was no need for anything. Just the election of the 36 innate Taos and the changes in the foundation of cultivation for at least the next few million years were enough to attract all the cultivators. No regrets. For a half-immortal like Yan Shishi who was able to persist until now and not rush over to this kind of super big scene, his willpower was already very strong. Qing Xian also wanted to stay in the five rings heavens for a few more days. Lu Xiaoyi understood his old friend's thoughts. Firstly, he was the same as Lu Xiaoyi. In fact, the best cultivation time in the domain, the Jin Dan and Yuanying periods, was in Zhou Xian instead of the five rings heavens. Secondly, he was worried that if something really happened, Lu Xiaoyi would not be able to handle it alone. The two of them returned home with the rest of the group, preparing to start the last period of their time together with their sect. I heard that in the three pure ones, the old guys are trying to breed for you? Lu Xiaoyi smirked. Qing Xian felt a chill run down her spine. This was a very normal thing, but when it came to this guy's mouth, it was completely different. The principle of a cultivator's progeny was that the higher the state, the more difficult it was. There were various reasons. The essence was too strong, the fetus could not bear it, the difference between the two was even greater than the difference between the species, and most importantly, the jealousy of the heavens. Therefore, the best time for a cultivator to establish a family was during the foundation building period, which was not much different from a mortal. When it came to Jin Dan, it was much more difficult. However, with the means of cultivation, as long as the right body of dual cultivation was chosen and with some means of support, there was still a chance. When it came to Yuanying, one could only rely on the heavens to make a living. The means of cultivation were completely useless, not to mention Jinjuan, half-immortal, and Stone Man and Stone Woman. Therefore, in the world of cultivation there were very few direct cultivator families. Most of them were collateral cultivator families. For example, the descendants of a cultivator's brothers and sisters did not seem to be that close to them. The three pure ones were different. They dared to be the first in the world. Since they dared to find a dual cultivation partner for Qing Xian, they naturally had the unique heritage of Taoism. Since they had this intention, it was not entirely impossible. Treating a dead horse as a living horse? It was also a way to strengthen the connection between Qing Xian and her sect. The ancient bloodline connection sounded like a joke, but it was very practical. This was because Qing Xian had some awkward things to talk about with the three pure ones. For example, he and Lu Xiaoyi were the same. They did not have a real master in their sect, and were close to each other. For example, the three pure ones were actually divided into Tai Qing, Yu Qing, and Shangqing. The three pure ones led by Qin Yangzi were actually Tai Qing, while Qing Xian was born of Shangqing. For example, the three pure ones of the universe had the intention of restraining Qing Xian. They interfered in his choice of Tao. All of these forced Qin Yangzi to consider the issue of Qing Xian's sense of belonging. After much consideration, he could only use this most ancient method to deepen the fusion between the two of them using the blood. Every family had their own difficulties and family matters were difficult to resolve. It was the same for cultivators. This made Qing Xian very distressed and annoyed. He was conflicted with the sex arrangement, but he could not blatantly reject it. This was equivalent to rejecting the good intentions of the various sects in the sect. Now this damned Lu Xiaoyi was rubbing salt on his wound. He was really hateful. Hence, he ignored him and took it as he was venting his anger. Although he did not want to bother, Qin Yangzi did not. This Lu Xiaoyi was close to his nephew. Perhaps he could understand Qin Xian's interests and hobbies? Old or young or rough, dignified or coquettish. He had to cater to his interests to have a target range. The three pure ones had a deep foundation, a solid family background, rich resources, and minds. What kind of woman could they not find? Hence, he smiled and said, "Superintendent, Qin Xian has been wandering outside for a long time. I don't know much about his temperament. You guys are brothers and know each other very well. I don't think it's good for you guys to watch my Wulu be all alone. I wonder if Superintendent has anything to teach me in this aspect?" Lu Xiaoyi grinned. "Old man, I'm not sleepy anymore if you say this." Chapter 2302. Lu Xiaoyi pretended to be serious. "Old man, let me ask you. At our level, do you think it's realistic to talk about childish love?" Qin Yangzi shook his head. "It's not realistic. When we were young, our abilities were limited. Because we couldn't see through each other, we were curious. Because of curiosity, we explored each other. This is the so-called feelings. How can he not see through his current situation? At a glance, he knows how many sweat pores there are. How can there be any secrets? If there are no secrets, there is no curiosity, there is no interest." Lu Xiaoyi clapped and laughed. "Old man, you are wise. You must have seen a lot of sweat pores when you were young, right? Then let me ask you again, do you think it's more realistic for him to go on a blind date at this age for feelings or for his descendant?" Qin Yangzi laughed. "Of course it's for his descendants." Lu Xiaoyi slapped his thigh. "That's right. So in the end, this is actually a technical problem. Since feelings aren't involved, why are you obsessed with this? Why don't you focus on solving the technical problem of how to leave behind the bloodline? Regarding the inheritance of cultivators, you know it better than I do. The key lies in 2 points. Is the other party's support strong? Will it attract the jealousy of the heavens? It's really hard to find such a person. If you find a half-immortal, you can't avoid the jealousy of the heavens. It's destined to be futile. If you find a mortal, you don't have to worry about the jealousy of the heavens. But she can't bear it either, don't you think so?" Qin Yangzi nodded his head. His words were crude but reasonable. Under such circumstances, it was impossible to find someone that he liked so much for Qin Xian. It was an insult to the cultivators. The more realistic way was to go straight to the point and talk about the descendant of the bloodline. "Do you have any ideas, Superintendent?" Lu Xiaoyi smiled mysteriously and lowered his voice. "There's only one type that can fulfill this condition. Demon beast. The chassis is strong. The key is not to attract the jealousy of the heavens. Think about it, when Tian Dao sees the huge difference between the two, it doesn't matter anymore?" Qing Yangzi also lowered his voice. Demon beast? This is also a direction. The 3 pure ones have demon veins in this area too. But are you sure that kid can accept it? Lu Xiaoyi smirked and said, Why is the old man so stubborn? Of course, he wouldn't accept demonic beasts. But what if they were half-blooded demonic beasts and half-blooded humans? Isn't that much better? Qing Yangzi said thoughtfully, Good idea. It's worth a try. I'll have to think about it, Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Qing Xian seems to be impatient recently. I have to find something for him to do. Since they were friends, he had to show some concern from time to time, right? The news of the 5th ring cultivators returning to the upper realm in large numbers had also inadvertently spread. Under escort Lu's foresight, the 5th ring cultivators united as one and eliminated a huge hidden danger in the path of the 5th ring. They saved hundreds of millions of people from calamity and saved the world from danger. There were many similar news in the universe. It was not just Lu Xiaoyi, there were many others. But if you looked carefully, these people were all people who might have a place in the new era. The power behind them was also slowly building up momentum. Now was not the time for the dogs to bite each other. They were still relatively gentle and restrained. However, it was expected that with the arrival of the new era, the competition on and off the stage, both inside and outside the Tao, would become more and more intense. Until the last moment, when the heavens and earth collided. They were all building up momentum, all kinds of momentum. They parted ways in outer space. Lu Xiaoyi sincerely bid farewell to Qing Xian's cultivator and wished him well. Qing Xian felt uneasy after hearing his polite words. He did not know what this grandson had done to the old man. He regretted staying behind alone. When it came to scheming, he might not be a match for this guy. After Lu Xiaoyi returned to the dome, Guandu asked, Little E, did you come back to find a quiet place to cultivate, or do you want to take up a position and integrate into the affairs of the sect? Or do you want to preach? He was very clear about this guy's nature. He would not be able to persist for long. It was just a kind of grinding on his own temperament. Every major cultivator would have their own way to deal with it. Some would fall into the mortal world. Some would self-reflect in isolation, some would travel the universe, some would use battles to sharpen their state of mind, and so on. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi did not lack battles. He would also not go into isolation and travel a lot. Therefore, it was highly likely that he wanted to participate in the management of the sect and obtain the sustenance of his state of mind. There was no need for a main position. Who knew when he would disappear? A secondary position would be important. Now, even the headmaster of Xianyuan could not keep his heart. This kid's future was in the universe, not a single boundary. But Lu Xiaoyi's answer still surprised him. There's no need to preach, right? I have left most of my things in the sect. The rest is mainly what I have gained in the Tao state. This cannot be rushed or talked about. I can only slowly organize it into a book and explain it in the form of travel note. I really do need a position. However, it is not in the dome, but in Xianyuan City at the foot of the mountain. I heard that Xianyuan City has a position as a craftsman deacon? I'll just take this one. Guandu listened with a confused expression. In Xianyuan City, there was one at the foot of the Blue Sky Mountain, and another at the foot of the Dome of the Five Rings. To put it bluntly, it was a place for cultivators' family members, distant relatives, and close neighbors. There would always be such and such mortals seeking refuge. The yuanying of half-immortals and true immortals were actually very limited in their family. Most of them were dead, so they did not care. The main composition was from the Jin Dan. There were tens of thousands of cultivators in the dome. One could imagine that even if only a portion of them brought along their families, it was still not a small number. After 20,000 years, it was normal for them to form a city. The management of this city was purely a matter of the Xianyuan sword sect. There were a few Jin Dan in charge. A large group of foundation establishment cultivators had a clear division of labor. There was also an even larger number of Qi cultivators to assist. A set of system was formed. Because the demands of cultivators were different from those of mortals, it was very difficult for deep-seated corruption to breed, and there was also no problem of promotion. Those who came here were all people who had no bright future and were looking for a place to retire. Of course, it could not be said to be clean and just. But compared to the mortal world, it was still much better. After all, it was close to the dome. There was no space for evil. The large group of ferocious swordsmen on the mountain was also a kind of deterrence. Such a good environment was hard to find elsewhere. It was also a characteristic of the cultivation world. Could not be replicated in the mortal world. The deacons were basically old foundation establishment cultivators who were past their prime. There was one characteristic, and that was the clear division of labor. This was a tradition from 20,000 years ago. It had the intention of Li Wuya. It was one of the few cities in the 5 rings that was willing to apply the limited knowledge of cultivation to the mortal world. It could also be understood that this was a city similar to the Fox Clan's world. In this place, there was also a trace of the embryonic form of a civilized city. Lu Xiaoyi was going to take on such a task. To put it bluntly, he did not care about the people. He was going to focus on making some novel things for cultivation. He wanted to see if there was anything that could be spread in the mortal world and make the lives of ordinary people more convenient. Chapter 2303. As he kept a low profile, Escort Lu became Craftsman Lu. No one knew where he came from. This kind of low profile was necessary, but it was also helpless. Otherwise, how could Xianyuan City be so peaceful? Just the little 100,000 foundation establishment cultivators would have to surround this place every day. Only a few high-level monarchs knew that he stayed in the dome, but they didn't say much. It was easy for him to ask for advice alone if he needed to cultivate. To be honest, even if these monarchs swaggered in Xianyuan City, no one would recognize them. Although the distance was very close, Xianyuan City and the dome were 2 different worlds. He was introduced to an ignorant Jin Dan city leader in Xianyuan City. The Jin Dan city leader then introduced him to a group of foundation establishment cultivators. It was so simple. There was no need for any special procedures, documents, or seals. Flying swords were their most reliable proof. Of course, the appearance still had to be changed slightly. After all, Escort Lu's voice and smile had spread throughout the universe. It was not difficult. He was lowering the dimension. In this kind of Xianyuan city, no one could recognize him as long as he wanted. But he didn't come back to pretend. At the Double 10,000 Flowers Festival, he even pretended to be an immortal. Why would he care about a quasi-cultivator city? His purpose was very clear. For the Xianyuan sword sect, he would organize and summarize what he had learned over the years. In the mortal world, he would settle his impetuous mentality caused by his overly intense cultivation life. He would quietly observe the movements of the 5-ring continents until the sense of crisis in his heart disappeared. The reason why he chose to be a city craftsman was that he wanted to be like the Fox Man, combining cultivation and life. He wanted to use cultivation to change life, the life of mortals. This idea sounded a bit too small, too insignificant, and too unimportant. But he believed that this was the true meaning of cultivation. He couldn't put forward such an idea now. It was too advanced. As long as the universe was full of spiritual opportunity, no one could truly understand his deep meaning. It was also the deep meaning of the former Li Wuya. But this was the trend, the true trend, the trend of ignoring the change of the era. One day, spiritual opportunity would disappear from this universe. Then, what supported the human social system would be another line of thought: the direction of science and technology. This timeline would be very long. Perhaps it would extend until he became an immortal and couldn't see the end of it. The basic time scale might be calculated in tens of millions of years. But no matter what, if he took one step now, he would take one step less in the future, and he would take fewer detours. Technology actually existed in every aspect of life, in every small and trivial place. Imperceptibly, it changed the lives of ordinary people. Unknowingly, at least in Xianyuan City, a brand new concept of quality of life was gradually taking shape and gradually spreading to the surrounding areas. When people traveled to Xianyuan City, they couldn't help but envy the various convenient living conditions here and naturally learn. This was the meaning of change. Actually, the fastest way to increase the level of science and technology was through war. However, in places where there were cultivators, the mortal world could not fight because they had the most advanced nuclear weapons, cultivators. Wasn't it overkill for a half-immortal like him to do this? A little pretentious? He didn't think so. If he didn't do it himself, what right did he have to ask others to do it? Moreover, to be honest, even if he had the strength of a half-immortal, it wasn't easy to apply the cultivation skills he knew to every bit of ordinary life. One needed to master too many skills, such as carving, casting, miniature arrays, and so on. In fact, it was a systematic project. He, Escort Liu, might not be qualified yet. He was assigned a small courtyard with 2 entrances. In Xianyuan City, where every inch of land was worth an inch of gold, only swordsman disciples had such benefit. This was a treatment that ordinary people and dignitaries had to pay a huge price to obtain. For swordsmen, this was the standard treatment. As for whether he needed servants or not, everyone had their own habits. Cultivators didn't lack this little bit of money. Although the place wasn't big, it didn't hinder his cultivation. With his current level, he didn't need to use his sword to practice. Everything was within his consciousness. This was the realm of half-immortal. Xianyuan City was the same as other big cities. It was also divided into east, south, west, north, and south. It was also divided into the rich district, the middle district, and the poor district. However, there was no cultivator district. This was because the Dome had a rule that cultivators' residences must be mixed in every district of the city. This way, they could better monitor the city's abnormal changes. Liu Xiaoyi's residence was in the middle district of the handicraft workshop. It could be said that it was very suitable for his identity and occupation. Except that it was a little noisy. There were a lot of shops in the front and a factory in the back. There were blacksmiths, carpenters, potters, and spinning carts. There was no idle time 24 hours a day. But it didn't matter. This kind of noise was meaningless to him. The residence was very clean and tidy. At first glance, it was obvious that it was regularly cleaned. In this world where there was basically no heavy industry, and light industry was stagnant at the level of handicraft, the sky was exceptionally blue, and the air under the snowy mountain was exceptionally fresh. Even if it wasn't cleaned for a month, there wouldn't be a layer of dust on the table. This was the original ecology. He didn't need to find servants because he didn't need to be taken care of. He had lived alone for 3,000 years. He had long become a loner. If someone was by his side, he would feel awkward. How long had it been since he had lived such a leisurely life? After fighting in the ever-changing cultivation world, having this kind of rare leisure time was also a kind of great enjoyment. He lacked this right now. Closing the courtyard door, he strolled along the bustling road. His Taoist robe was not very conspicuous, because here, Xuanyuan's Taoist robe was the standard. Looking at the streets, half of the men were dressed like this. This made him feel a special sense of belonging. His own domain, his own orthodoxy, his own city, his own courtyard. Similar habits, similar ideas, familiar local accent, pleasant smell of cooking smoke. When all these were mixed together, it was the feeling of home. Among the feelings of being at home, the most prominent one was relaxed. Thus, following the fragrance, he found a beef noodle restaurant in the restaurant. Because his sense of smell could help him find the most authentic one among the many small restaurants, the one with the most delicious taste and the freshest ingredients. Dear guest, please come in. I find you unfamiliar. Do you need me to introduce the specialty food of this restaurant? A corner of wine, a plate of meat, a bowl of noodles. Also, bring up some of your best dishes. Lu Xiaoyi found a seat by the window and enjoyed his dinner amidst the noise. Listening to the bustling streets around him, his mood became exceptionally relaxed. Actually, the essence of life should be simple, right? What surprised him was that the joy of killing the immortal Peng was actually not as good as eating a bowl of noodles here. What was the difference between the two? Chapter 2304. It wasn't mealtime right now, so there were few customers in the restaurant. Lu Xiaoyi saw that the waiter was idle, so he called him over for some questions. Actually, there was no need for him to go through so much trouble. All he needed to do was sweep his divine sense over the buildings in Xianyuan City and their general functions. However, this would lose the joy of entering the mortal world, and it would be unavoidably awkward to hear anything that wasn't suitable for children. Morality was a kind of invisible restraint. It was in every detail of a cultivator's life. If you could still maintain a certain bottom line in a situation where no one was paying attention, and still treat respect for others as an instinct, then you were basically moral. There are many shops on this street. I'll list them one by one for you. Huaji Clothing Shop, Snow Mountain Ceramics, Dali Ironware, Song Yun Study Room. He looked at the customer's expression and saw that he didn't show any interest, so he continued. Lianmu Family Shop, Fuguei Silk Forge, Inchang Bill Shop, Jinli Pawn. Lu Xiaoyi smiled but didn't say anything. The waiter then changed a few more shop. West House Talisman Shop, Fourth Ring Magic Weapon, Longevity Pill Room, Little White Dao Hall. The waiter discovered that this customer seemed to be very picky. He didn't seem to be very interested in the places he reported. As a qualified food worker, he naturally wouldn't recommend other restaurants, but he still had something he was good at. Spring Arrival Restaurant, Rouge Pavilion, Fragrance of the Four Seasons, Night Song. Finally seeing the customer smile, the waiter felt disdain in his heart. After pretending for so long, wasn't it all for this? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Hearing these very lively names made him feel very close. At least this proved that he was still alive and had flesh and blood. What he was afraid of was that when his cultivation reached a certain level, he wouldn't feel any ripples in his heart when he heard these dishonest practices. That would be the tragedy of life. Right now, yes, he was still barely normal. After paying for the wine, he strolled out under the waiter's still enthusiastic and disdainful gaze. As expected, he walked towards the gathering place of the wind and moon. Pa! What the hell? The waiter fiercely spat. It wasn't that he hated this kind of behavior, but in this kind of place, the money he painstakingly saved for half a year might not even be enough to spend once. Lu Xiaoyi began his carefree mortal life. Of course, it was intermittent. Every 2 years, he would secretly make a trip to the outer space. He wouldn't go far, but he would do a thorough search of the airspace in front of the Fifth Ring's tracks every year. With his terrifying speed, the range he could fly to in a year was much greater than the others. A year of travel would basically cover the distance of several years on the Fifth Ring's route. This cycle repeated. He finally understood that it was useless to run too far away, because he didn't know when the astronomical phenomena would change. It would be good if it could be guaranteed for a few years. Once every 3 years, it could ensure the safety of the route for the next few years within a controllable range. This was the extremely close space of the fifth ring. No one dared to cause trouble here, and he could fly as he pleased. But he had also been hunted down. For example, *T Lu. Stop right there. Don't run if you have the ability. Didn't he boast that he was invincible among half-immortals? I've been pissed off at you for a long time. Come at me if you have the guts. Let's fight to the death. Lu Xiaoyi turned a deaf ear and ran as fast as he could. He was like a different person from the legendary ruthless and unparalleled escort Lu. He knew why this person went crazy. He must have been forced into a marriage by his family. Then, he found an opportunity to patrol the airspace like him, searching for any astronomical phenomena that might appear. It was best to ignore such a lunatic. This was just a coincidence. The two of them had different patterns of patrolling the airspace, so it would be difficult for them to meet again. They were both people with a strong sense of responsibility and trusted each other. So even if everyone else left, this law idiot wouldn't leave. With friends like this, there was nothing to worry about. Everyone had their own patterns of patrolling, so there was no need to stagger. Different people would have different interpretations of the same astronomical phenomenon. It was better to have some repetitions. Just treat it as a late-night car racing. In the remaining 2 years, Lu Xiaoyi slowly sorted out his achievements in swordsmanship. This was his blood, sweat, and tears. But in this big family, there was nothing he couldn't share. Just like how Xian Yuan didn't hide anything from him when he first came to the dome, he wouldn't hide anything from those who came after him. Cultivation actually didn't have much to do with secret manuals. It was completely different from the understanding of mortals. This was a profession that required one to comprehend on their own. In a cultivation world like the fifth ring, there were many basic techniques. Everyone could come in contact with them, but there were very few who could truly walk down the path. It was all up to the individual, not someone who fell into a treasure trove and learned the legacy of a senior. In terms of legacy, what legacy was more systematic, comprehensive, and profound than Xuanyuan's sect? The true legacy didn't lie in those so-called secret manuals. It was a spirit, a tradition, and a philosophy. It lay in the insights, travels, and gossip of countless swordsmen seniors in this system. Those were the most important things. In Lu Xiaoyi's growth, what he liked to read the most were the insights left behind by these seniors. Interesting experiences, inexplicable feelings, and things that struck deep into one's heart. Now it was his turn to leave these things behind. This was very important, because in the future, he wouldn't have the time to sort out these things systematically. He might as well do it now. It was also a review of his 3,000 years of swordsmanship. When he set up the Tao tablet, some things related to the truth of the heavenly Tao would be unspeakable. If someone really succeeded in becoming a celestial, then it would be even more unspeakable. This was the rule of the cultivation world. He personally felt that such a rule was meaningful. It could prevent certain forces from growing too big forever and crush the rising forces. What he did in the dome, Qing Xian must have done in the three pure ones. In fact, it was because they had a vague premonition of their own future. But Shi and Yen Mu didn't have such awareness. This actually represented something that people didn't want to think about. You can't persuade them. In the remaining time, he put his energy into all kinds of whimsical small productions. Useful ones, useless ones, fun ones. He didn't have any plans for this. No one could have a specific plan for something that might happen tens of millions of years in the future. Even immortals couldn't. It was enough to just have a game mentality. Therefore, compared to his predecessor, he was a little unreliable as a craftsman deacon. No one bothered him. As long as the mayor of Xianyuan didn't have any opinions, others couldn't be bothered to have any opinions. They were just a bunch of losers whose Tao path was broken. Of course, they wouldn't be so diligent in handling official affairs. It was human nature. Chapter 2305. Lu Xiaoyi also held a small sword gathering once in a while. His target group was mainly at the true monarch level. For the Yuanying, giving them too much would instead affect their cultivation rhythm. They were already under the pressure of the new era, and they also had the guidance of a half-immortal in the sect. If they were anxious, who knew what kind of impulsive things they would do, causing harm to others and themselves? There were still some promising seeds among the true monarchs, like Yen Dai, Guang Ming, Guang Yao, Zhou Fan, Song Rong, and so on. They were also the backbone of Xuanyuan's continuation in the main world. No matter what happened in the end, they still had a lifespan of a few thousand years, or even longer. Most people's gazes were focused on the trembling of the new era, but Lu Xiaoyi was more focused on the beginning of the new era. That trembling was the trembling of the top figures like them. For most people, the future was still long. Although the number of people after the new era might not be as large as before, if one looked at the river of time, it would definitely be the most turbulent era. There would be far more opportunities than after the new era stabilized. This was what a sect truly valued. There had to be a focus, like him and Yenchen. There also had to be a comprehensive focus, like this group of young true monarchs. This kind of vision was what a great sect should have. They shouldn't rely on trembling all the time, and if that didn't work, they would have diarrhea. Such days continued for 50 years. If the time when the Fifth Ring forces searched for the sea route was included, 65 years had passed since Zhenbai's 100-year deadline. The influence of the Fifth Ring's 10,000-year celebration had long passed. Now, the biggest event in the universe was the land of the Yellow Dragon. There was nothing else. Even the wars between realms were rare. The universe was about to change, so who would still stupidly fight each other to the death? It entered a relatively stable period, and it was certain that it would become more and more stable. The universe was stable, but the land of the Yellow Dragon might not be. When all the high-level cultivators in the universe gathered in one place, it was obvious what would happen there. It wouldn't just be a Tao debate, there would be more violent things. Up until now, 17 innate Taos had already collapsed. There were 19 left. Seeing that they had entered the accelerated stage, 4 of them had collapsed the last time. In the future, continuous collapses like this would become common, so these 19 wouldn't be able to withstand the collapse. The location of the Yellow Dragon's land could be called the center of the universe. The 4 symbols heavens used it as the center, spreading out infinitely in the shape of a cone. Within it, there were countless realms of various sizes scattered about. Some were far from the center, while others were close. When the future era changed, those who were close to the new era would have a huge advantage. They would be able to reach the new era, and even Yuanying cultivators would be able to witness the grand occasion of the new era. However, those who were far away would not be able to do so. For people at the level of Yuanying cultivators, their lifespans were limited. They would not be able to spend thousands or even hundreds of years on the journey. The location of the Fifth Ring was not too far from the eastern elephant sky. If a true monarch were to fly there, it would take about 1,000 years in the main world. If it was in the negative space, it would take no more than 200 years. However, the people of the Fifth Ring Road rarely went to the land of the Yellow Dragon. This was because they were especially sensitive to the dangers and were unwilling to rush there too early. As a result, their hometown was left empty. Who knew if a certain cultivation force would use this opportunity to plot against them? In order to reassure the people, the 3 great leaders also specially announced that they would open an express negative space route to the land of the Yellow Dragon before the era changed. They would use the best, fastest, and largest treasured ship in the Fifth Ring Road. Moreover, there would be no charge. All expenses would be supported by the three great leaders. This was a reassuring pill. It gave countless Yuaniing true monarchs from small sects and factions a realistic hope. It would also save them from leaving early and getting lost in the void of the universe for nothing. If accidents happened, they would lose their lives before the era changed. It also ensured that the Fifth Ring Road would always be fully equipped and ready for battle. This was the way of survival for bandits. It also allowed these people to support the seated contestants of the three great leaders in the future. Of course, it was needless to say. Everyone knew to support their own children. In fact, the Fifth Ring Road was not the only one to take such actions. Any realm that had a little bit of strength, a little bit of responsibility, and a cohesive force would do the same. With the wisdom of cultivators, there was no one who did not understand this simple logic. Therefore, there were very few cultivators gathered in the land of the Yellow Dragon. They all had the ability to travel through the universe, and their realms were generally at least Yang Soul. Many of them did not only come to observe, but also to establish themselves. This was the general environment. Under the calm, a storm was brewing. Once it started, the sky would change. On this day, a young Taoist came to Xianyuan City. He was dressed in the attire of a Dharma cultivator, slightly different from the swordsman. However, in the current Fifth Ring Road, not many people cared about these small differences, especially in a place like Xianyuan City. It was not the core of Xianyuan, so no matter what orthodoxy one was from, it was fine to stay or leave. Walking on the spacious and clean streets of the city, the Taoist was somewhat surprised. The Fifth Ring Road's cultivation civilization was very developed, but it was the first time he had seen a city that was so well planned and organized. From his conversations with the locals, he learned that this was the result of 50 years of infrastructure projects in the city. It was not only the streets and roads but also many other things. 50 years? You've been doing this for 50 years? The Taoist was somewhat puzzled. He still couldn't figure out what this had to do with the establishment of Tao in the new era. However, that guy's actions were always unexpected and unconventional. Him messing around with things that seemed to have nothing to do with cultivation was indeed in line with his personality. The shops on the streets had a dazzling lineup of goods. Even the knowledgeable Taoist was somewhat confused about the uses of some of them. He knew that guy was buried here as a craftsman. Could it be that he was the one who invented all these boring mortal things? It was very possible. He couldn't be treated as a normal person. Sometimes, he didn't quite understand how he had become friends with such a person. Could it be that he was mentally unsound? When he passed by a kitchenware shop, there were many people outside. The shop owner was doing his best to advertise. There are many strange things happening in Shuecheng. All the housewives love me. Let's see if I don't touch the cooking pot. The Taoist shook his head. What a common practice in Xianyuan City. How could people use the means of cultivation on these meaningless tricks? With just a glance, he knew what this was. In the Fifth Ring, cooking methods had also evolved. From the original simple and monotonous cooking to the present day, all kinds of frying, stir-frying, and frying were the most indispensable part of cooking. However, in stir-frying, it was very annoying for the ingredients to stick to the pan due to uneven heating. Of course, this was only for mortals. Cultivators only needed to use a layer of magic to stir-fry. The problem was, which cultivator would change their profession to become a chef? So, this was probably the reason for inventing the cooking pot? A strange city, a strange swordsman. In fact, the key was that strange friend. The Taoist knew that this lousy thing must have been created by that guy. He didn't do anything proper. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.